The Kingswood had a sound that did not belong to any one creature. It was the slow talk of old trees rubbing their boles against one another, the bristle of needles when wind combed them, the faint scrape of beetles at the undersides of bark. At night it breathed. When the torches guttered low, the forest seemed to inhale with them and exhale resin and old sap and the sharp, clean bite of crushed pine. Horses shifted and stamped. The hunting tents, fine and pale as moth wings by day, took on the look of shrouds when the last of the wine fires went out. Stars clung at the tips of swaying branches. Somewhere a stag coughed, the rough bark of it strange in the dark, and a nightjar clicked and turned like a piece on a board unseen. Robert Baratheon woke with his face half pressed into a pelt and his mouth tasting of tar and sour grape. The low roof of the royal pavilion seemed lower than it had when he lay down. A coal cracked in the brazier. He felt the heat as a single point at his ribs. Nearby, the great warhammer with its blackened head leaned where he had left it, shadow filling the hollows of the iron like old blood left to cake. His left shoulder ached in a way that was familial. Old hurts paid their respects in the morning. He lay there and listened. The body of a man could forget many things. Names, the exact shape of a face at 16, the precise weight of a newborn in his hands, but it did not forget woods. It remembered wooden spears, mud, and the way breath sounded just before a boar broke brush. It remembered not in words but in small angles of the bones and the softening of the belly. He felt his body do these things without calling them down. He breathed with the trees. He tried to move and decided at once that moving would leave a dent in the morning where he had lain. He rolled all the same. The pelt fell from his chest. He was still thick as he had been thick a year ago and 10 years ago, but thick had become different things. Once it had been all under the skin. Now there were pockets of softness that had collected in the ways of a man who loved meat and wine and the roars of men more than he loved the hard disciplines of being the man those roars imagined. His hand fell upon the hammer's haft. The oiled wood felt good. He liked the way it told him a truth about himself that could not be argued with. A boy's foot scuffed canvas outside. Lancel Lannister, all nerves and reed bones, had the particular sound of a youth who tried to make no sound and so invented 3 in avoiding the first. Robert could hear him hesitate. The hesitation had a shape. It was the pause of a lad waiting to see if his lord was sweet or sour. Robert smiled without warmth. "Come, cub," he said, voice low and roughened, and the speaking put a sour taste of old wine into the air. The flap stirred. Lancel dipped his head in with the humility of one inching toward a hound that might bite for sport. He had a flagon hugged to his chest as if it might leap down and run. He smelled faintly of rose oil, as if some ant had told him that would soften his edges for a king's eyes. Robert's head ached in the shape of the boy's hair. "My lord," Lancel said, and his voice cracked in a way that made the king feel both fond and murderous. "The hounds have a scent. Ser Rabar says the beast went lower toward the stream before turning back toward the ridge, like as not for water. They think it's a boar," Robert said, "because we're hunting a boar, and hunts rarely give you stags when you ask for pigs. Give me some of that before I break the day with my bare hands." The boy came, hands careful. Robert watched his mouth whiten at the corners with the strain of holding the flagon so reverently that he might as well be presenting a chalice to some fat septon. He took it and lifted it, letting the first wash of it rattle his tongue and throat. The wine was stronger than truth and less forgiving. Behind it he tasted something that wasn't wine. Not bad, not necessarily bad, but different. He looked at Lancel over the rim. The lad was watching him as if he had just walked into a sept with a torch. Robert grunted and took another swallow and set it down with the firm decision of a man who has decided he will be better or worse within the hour. He rose and pulled a shirt over his head. The linen caught at his shoulders and then gave, and the air sneaked between cloth and skin with a comfort he had not earned today. Outside, dawn had been born and was being rocked slowly into full voice. The camp had the patient business of mourning. Men lacing leathers, a whetstone being drawn along a blade with a regularity that soothed like a remembered prayer, dogs whining once and then settling. Renly's banner hung limp, The crowned stag of Baratheon worked in golden thread, nodding as if bored. Renly himself was already up and dressed, which meant he had not slept or else had slept the way a cat sleeps, with an ear on it. In the first light he looked 16, a boy playing at the edges of two worlds. "You sound like hammered iron when you breathe," Renly said, not looking up from the strip of apple he was slowly peeling with a wee knife. "Shall I have the smith come and file you smooth? You sound like a wife I never married," Robert said, and took the apple out of his hand and bit it in half and chewed. The crisp sweetness laid a hand on his tongue and told him things could yet be different than they had been all night. "We ride." They rode, then into the green, and the trees closed around them like old friends remembering his name. A sound went ahead of them that was not birds and not boar. It was the whisper of men who believed themselves quiet. The hounds took it into themselves and did not object. The trail made itself honest. A beaten place where earth was turned up as if a plow had run wild. Punctures in the loam where a hoof had driven, and deeper scrapes where something harder had grounded with weight behind it. The smell was thick, pig sweat and mud, and the kind of musk that belonged to the first animals that had learned to love muck. Robert felt the old field self come up out of the underself. He ran his thumb along the hammer's haft. The leather binding there had the polished feel of long habit. The boar sound, he heard it before he saw it. That deep, surprisingly wet noise of an animal that lives close to its own earth and breaks it when it wishes. The brushes parted as if they belonged to the beast. It stood, then, not 20 paces off, with its head low and its small eyes hot and considering. It was bigger than truth and uglier than reason and perfect in the way only a creature entirely itself could be. The first spear went in at the shoulder and came out of its own accord. The boar took it personally and disliked it. Dogs showed their teeth and then remembered that teeth sometimes receive as much as they give. Someone shouted a name that could have been any man's name. Robert did not call for the spear thrust that came from Lancel's thin hands, because men sometimes destroy boys by asking them to be men too soon. He did not think. He stepped from the saddle with a heaviness that folded the grass, and he felt his feet catch ground the way feet must if a man would meet a charge without flinching. The boar came. He saw the head like a battering ram, the little glinting of the eye. He saw the wet bristles that lay along its spine like an army's banners after rain. He put the hammer's face forward and heaved it not as a weapon but as a decision. The iron connected with a sound that belonged inside bone. He felt it in his teeth. He went to one knee as if in prayer. The boar's head went sideways and then it went upside down and then it tried to rediscover where the world kept its floor. It found Robert instead. Something in the boy's cry told him that Lancel had not learned to say the names of gods under strain. Robert shifted and the tusk that could have open-gutted a horse put a white line across his thigh and stopped there. Snubbed by male lynx he had told a squire to polish last night, and the boy had actually polished. He noted that with a part of his mind not engaged in remaining unpunctured. He rose with the kind of rising that lives in the groin and the back and the heels, and he brought the hammer down again. The second blow was the one that made the world pause and then resume. The boar's life went out of it in that quiet way life goes from animals when they have lived as they were made to live and died as they were made to die. There was blood, but it was boar blood, and so it smelled like pennies in the dirt and not like anything that makes a man's heart remember days he keeps under stones. Robert stood and breathed and counted himself among the living. The cut along his thigh stung and would be a dark boast later, or an annoyance, or both. Lancel arrived last, as boys do when courage has to climb through their limbs like a slow traveler arriving after the guests. His face was the pale of soft cheese. His eyes were wrong. They had the look of a deer's. He held the wineskin as if it were law. "Drink, my lord," he said, and the eagerness in it was too strong for the hour. Robert looked at him and did not take it immediately. He saw, in the boy's tremble and the sheen at his hairline and the way his jaw had no room for his teeth, something that had not to do with the boy and more to do with the house that had fed him. The cut stung again and made its small argument for wine. Robert took the skin, but he did it slowly, and when he put it to his mouth he did not drink. He tipped just enough to wet his lips and let a thread of liquid run against the ache in his tongue. That taste again. Sophisticated for a hunt. An old man's hand in a young man's duties. He lowered the skin and handed it back. Lancel concealed a flicker of disappointment poorly. Renly's gaze moved between them and then away as if he'd seen two men in a bed and was too courtly to notice their nakedness. "Have that butchered," Robert said of the boar, and spitted, "and we'll see if the kinkswood tastes as good as I remember. And boy," he added when Lancel had almost turned away, "if you ever again offer me wine in the field as if I were some old aunt who weeps over her supper, I'll make you drink it yourself until your belly tears. Do you understand me?" The boy's swallow had the sound of a bird tripping in dry leaves. "Yes, my lord," he said, and fled toward the business of butchery the way a deer flees toward what it hopes is open ground. They ate the boar because men do what their fathers did and their fathers' fathers. It was smoky and fat-sweet and left grease under the thumb that tasted of iron and pine. Robert watched men laugh with their mouths full and lay a dirty hand on another man's dirty back and call him fine names. He laughed with them because he was not a jealous king. Laughter sat easily in him. But it was a different laugh today, and when he ate he tasted, after the meat's brine and the smoke's old kiss, the persistence of that wine. He rode back that afternoon with the sun in his eyes and a thought in his mouth like a hard seed you cannot chew. He said little. The trees broke apart in a curl of lower branches, and the city showed itself with a frankness that never failed to surprise. King's Landing was one thing close at hand and another from any distance. From here it was all sheen and promise, the way a blade is when it lies in a bath of oil. The red of the keep was a bruise blooming over the high rock. The bay had its usual dish of light. Under his horse the ground gave way to the bad roads that made courtiers cry and carts weep, and served him daily as a reminder that a king's first lie is that the crown weighs equally on every head. Sweat dried on him until it was a salt map. Renly rode at his side, now and again saying nothing so well that it seemed like wit. The gate swallowed them, and the city opened its hot throat. Fish and garlic and the fat sour of the tanneries made a perfume that belonged to the place as surely as the small folk did. The city watch looked more awake when the king's eye passed, which was long practice, and less awake after, which was honest. Inside the red keep the air felt different. It held still as if it hid. The guards at the doors held their spears like sober men. The flagstones kept the heat, and it rose from them in waves like breath off a sleeping hound. Robert's boots remembered the path to his rooms, then the quick path to the small hall, then the longer one to the Tower of the Hand. His body made those paths without asking his leave. Eddard Stark's chamber smelled of beeswax and old parchment and new-cut rushes. It always smelled as if it had been made plain that morning. Ned himself had a way of smelling like good water in a wooden cup. He stood when Robert came in, which was foolish and formal all at once. To put something kind in Robert and something hard. "You look as if you tried to fight a tree and the tree forgave you," Ned said. He had that half-smile that could be mistaken for mildness by people who did not know the slope of the bones under it. "I hit the right end of the pig," Robert said. He felt the words as a rope he could climb down into a shallower pool where nothing waited. He did not go. "You sent word that would not wait." Ned did not point at the chair. He did not take Robert by the arm. He did not fuss. He turned to a table where a large book lay open and its pages caught the light like the belly of a fish. The thing had been in the Tower of the Hand from the first week. Robert remembered it even when drunk, because he had laughed at it then and asked if Stark was going to teach him letters as if he were a crannic child. Ned put his hand on it now the way a man puts a hand on a grave. "The Book of Lineages," he said, and his voice made the phrase heavy. "Seed and branch, marriages and issue, down to the present day." Robert made a face at the book before he could help it. "If you called me from boar and meat to recite cousinhoods, I'll take your left ear off and make you drink from it." Ned did not look cowed. He was never cowed. He stood there with the grave patience of men who cut their meat and their truth with the same knife. "I came to King's Landing in part for this," he said. "John Arryn died hunting the same boar I've been hunting these weeks. Names and hair and coincidence. There are patterns when you look and child faces when you don't. Speak plain," Robert said. But his stomach had already done what stomachs do when the body expects a blow. A small tightening. The tastes of meat and wine made a last argument and then withdrew. Ned drew the book toward them and turned a page that made no sound in all sounds. He placed his finger on a line as if teaching a child his letters. Baratheon, he said, with no pride in it. Black of hair, each generation. Stannis and you and Renly. Your father, your grandfather. Children born of Baratheon seed and strong. Look, one after the other. His finger moved. Now Lannister marriages. There are several. Note the hair. I know Lannisters and their hair, Ned. I've had my fill. He meant to make it cruel and made it only heavy. Gold, Ned said. Even where the mother is different. Gold. The silence between them lengthened. It gained its own weight. It had within it the small dry sound of a heartbeat that has not yet quickened. And my get, Robert said. He felt the word like an old soldier's coat dragged up and put on again. Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen. Ned closed the book. The hush of its pages meeting was indecent. Joffrey is not your son, he said, and then, because he was Ned, he did not leave the blade there to rust. Nor are Myrcella and Tommen. The room had many doors once in other lives. They had been bricked and covered. The air in it hung for a count of 4 and then broke. Robert laughed. He kept laughing until it hurt somewhere under the breastbone that had not been tender in years. He stopped laughing. He spat on the floor because sometimes a man is more honest when he spares the rushes and not the dignity of a chamber. Jaime, he said. He made the name an oath. Of course it's Jaime. So clean it stinks. I've been sleeping in a manor with both twins for years, and no one thought to wake me. Ned did not wince. I thought to wake you, he said. I went to her, Robert. I told her what I had found. You told Cersei. The name did not hold affection. It was simply a vessel. He pictured her dark gold in candlelight, that laugh she had when she was annoyed and wished not to be. He pictured Jaime's easy grin and the sword that lived as a thought in the man's hand. The two of them set side by side like matching goblets. And in your thoughtfulness, you gave her time to set a table. I gave her time, Ned said, and owned it. I did not want your children. He stopped. He changed it. I did not want the children to pay for their parents' sin. Robert looked at him with a tiredness that did not belong to today. I love you for what you are, he said, and knew the words were a kindness that men rarely spoke to one another and might be taken poorly because kindness often is. But I am king. He let that sit. Who else knows? Pycelle will not move without Cersei. Varys knows he can know when he wishes. Littlefinger suspects everyone and fears nothing that is not a sum. Renly knows that something is wrong and thinks to shape it. Stannis knows. It was partly Stannis's trail that led me here. He sees the pattern and refuses to color it, which is more than most will do. Stannis, Robert said, and the name put vinegar in him. Of course he knows. The gods forbid Stannis allow a thing to be ugly without witnesses. He turned away and walked to the window as if there were air there that could be better than this air. The bay lay below like some fat noble with blue cloth pulled up to its chins. He set his palms against stone that had listened to other kings. The stone was cool. It did not care about men's seed. Jaime drew steel on my men in the street, he said, not looking back. He cut them down like summer wheat. That is not a rumor. That is sweat and blood on the cobbles. He ran to father like the little boy who breaks a plate and calls his mother to see. Tywin gathers because Tywin gathers. The Riverlands are a cloth he plans to wring for their water. And in my own house my wife has... He found no word that would not soil him. My wife. Ned's voice was not low or high. It sat in the middle like a stone in a river. You are not a man in your own house anymore when the truth is this. You are king. The law is the law. Bastards do not sit iron thrones. A woman who cuckolds her king is guilty of treason. The King's Guard takes vows. We have all been playing at peace. Robert turned. He was breathing with a little noise now, which he did not like in himself. If I kill them, the realm will split like old wood. If I leave them breathing, the rot continues. It is simple, he said, and smiled like a man speaking of the sea as if it were a pond, because if he did not, the other option was to go and lie down. I will have war with the Lannisters, not whispers, not letters. Va. I will pull down Cersei's house stone by stone if I must to find the place where her bed and her brother meet. I will drag Jaime to the steps of the September and make him swear before God's men have forgotten. I will find Tywin in the Riverlands and remind him that I have killed men better than him with a hammer I can barely lift now. When I am done, if there is anyone left to chide me for the law, I'll show them the book and they can go tell the gods I read too slowly. Ned was still. Then he nodded. Once. The nod said what words could not. Then we must plan as men who mean to do a thing and not talk of it. Your brothers. Renly is here and Stannis is at his rock, Robert said. Send for Stannis. He will come in full righteousness and sour the wine for us all. Send word to Storm's End. I want my banners. Have Davos. No, I will not ask that smuggler's name in a council chamber. Never mind. Send a raven to Lords Tarth and Cairn and Penrose. Tell them that their king calls and expects to be obeyed by men who still value their own tongues. The city watch, he added with a taste of iron. They were bought once in this city. The watch shifts like a school of fish. We will not have them turning on us because some man with a little coin and a little cleverness smiles. Little finger, Ned said, plain as a knife. Baelish holds the purse. Baelish holds a dozen other things and pretends to juggle. Bring him. Bring Varys. Bring Pycelle. Bring Selmy, by all gods. I want him in the room when we speak of vows. And Ned. Robert's voice changed, not much, but enough that the other man's eyes sharpened. Not a word to Cersei until I have all of it in my hands. No honorable warnings. No time. She will smile and her eyes will go wide and she will ask me if I have hurt myself on a hunt. And then she will poison the city with a breath. Ned took that. It was not easy on him. He swallowed it the way men swallow a bad draft because the leech insists. As you say, Robert let the breath he had been holding go. He felt lighter and heavier at once. Good. Summon the council. Today. An hour from now. I want my sword belt and that hammer polished until I can see what's left of my father in it. The hour had a way of being shorter than others. The small council chamber was not small, but it always felt it with men in it. The oval table forced men to sit as if there were civility here that did not belong to their thoughts. Varys arrived like a fragrance and took his seat without making the stool complain. Pycelle came wheezing like a bellows, beard combed in a way that suggested a girl had been weeping earlier over his oldness and had done it for him out of pity. Littlefinger drifted and took a seat that let light fall very prettily on the coin he wore at his throat. He smiled the way a cat sits, and men think it is sleeping when it is counting mice. Ser Barristan Selmy stood rather than sat. He stood with his hand resting lightly on the table, and the table by some sorcery did not lean away from him in respect. Renly took the place at Robert's right hand and twirled a ring once off his finger and back on in a way he did not know he was doing. Ned, at Robert's left, had the book of lineages under his palm, closed as if it still breathed. They waited for the king to speak, and he did, but he did not like being made to speak first. Jaime Lannister drew steel on Lord Stark's men in the street and sent half of them to the stranger. He has gone to his father because his father will always collect him. Tywin Lannister must answer for this, and he will answer to his king. Robert paused just long enough to make them think it was the end of the sentence. My queen, he added, letting the word stand by itself, has broken her marriage vows and committed treason in my bed, and by the law of gods and men, her children by another cannot claim a throne. It was a good thing to watch the ways men looked when the ground tips under them. Pycelle made an old man sound that was equal parts surprise and indigestion and raised one soft paw as if to pet air back into smoothness. Your Grace, these are grave words, grave. Grave enough for you to shut your mouth while I am still speaking, Robert said, and it was not even angry, merely descriptive. Pycelle shut his mouth with the slow horror of a door closing on a room in which a lamp still burned. Varys did not change. He kept the exact same interest in his eyes, the same bland politeness, which meant he had let the shock run over him the way water runs over wholly oiled wood. Littlefinger put his chin on his fingertips the way one might when listening to a story told by a child one loves and intends to indulge. Ser Barristan bowed his head. It was the smallest of bows. Filled the room. "Your Grace," he said, and there was a weight in 3 syllables. "If this is so, the law is plain." "Plain," Robert said, "and the realm is not, so we will make it plain by force if we must. Tywin Lannister rides roughshod through the Riverlands. He thinks himself a power because he sits on a hill made of his own gold. I have 2 hands that can make a hill of skulls. We are done with soft menace. I declare war upon House Lannister." He liked the sound of that. It had been a while since he had heard himself say anything that sounded like this. Renly made a small breath that might have been relief. Littlefinger clicked his tongue in a way that could be read as admiration or grief. Varys's fingers made a temple of themselves. Pycelle found his voice only to lose it at once. Ned's voice entered like a blade set down gently on the table. "Then steps," he said. "First, secure the city. The watch must be properly paid, and the captains who might be bought must be removed. I have men loyal to me who will obey your orders. Ser Barristan, the Kingsguard, our vows," Barristan said, and his eyes moved not to Robert, but to the unspeaking place in the air where swears and kings meet. "We are sworn to the king. The king speaks. The rest is for other men." Robert felt love for him then, as a man can feel for a hound that has never failed to return, no matter what the forest does. "Good. Sell me. Take 3 of yours and put them to stand at my chamber door and the doors of my children." He did not say "my children" with any softness and did not place any pride in it. "If the queen wishes to go out riding today, she will ask me first. If Joffrey wishes to go and scowl at the yard, he will ask me first. Myrcella can bring her little dogs and her harp to me. Tommen." He stopped. He tasted the boy's name. It was not Tommen's fault. None of it was Tommen's fault. Tommen will remain at his books and not be troubled. Littlefinger arranged his mouth with careful carelessness. "And the coins to make these necessary things easy," he said. "The watch has not been paid in full these 2 months. A curious thing, one would think, in a city where there is always enough to drink but never enough to count." Robert slid him a look that would have boiled off lesser men. "Count then. Count faster. You keep the keys, Baelish." "I keep many keys," Littlefinger said, with a small apology that was completely unrepentant. "We will have ravens," Ned said, "to Dragonstone, to Storm's End, to the Tullus and Arryns. Even if the Eyrie gives us nothing, it costs little to ask for help from the place that used to be your father by Law's house. To the north, my lord? The north will not be first to bleed, but it will not go sour if it is asked." Robert rubbed the cut on his thigh through the cloth and felt for a moment how simple pain can be when the rest is not. "Send to Winterfell. Ask Robb to keep his wolves asleep for now and his men nearer their hearths than the Trident. But tell them to make ready quietly. The north is slow, but when it comes with its own weather." Varys leaned forward very slightly. "The Queen, your grace," he said, soft as down. "What are your intentions regarding the Queen?" "I will not have her head today," Robert said, and it sounded like law because he wore a crown when speaking it. "I will speak with her, in the presence of my Lord Commander and my hand. She will know I know. She will be confined to her chambers until this matter is settled in a manner that makes the gods unclench. If she attempts to flee, she will find the city smaller than it was yesterday." "Confined?" Littlefinger repeated, tasting the word to see if it contained coin. "Very well." Pycelle looked at his hands, which were old and fine and trembled slightly. "Your Grace," he said, and managed not to wheeze it. "In my long years I have seen queens and their tears do much, and none of it is what I would name gentle. It might be prudent to allow her Grace to go to Casterly Rock until tempers." "Pycelle," Robert said, and put an entire field's worth of horses stopping into the syllables. "My queen does not go anywhere. I cannot see her with both eyes until I am done with this." He stood, and the table understood it could now groan quietly at having him there. Ned, with me, sell me. Renly, if you wish to stand by your queen, you may come and do it with your mouth closed. Varys, go and listen to rats. Baelish, find your coin. Pycelle, fetch a draft for my leg. Something that mends. Not that sweet piss you've been sending me when you want me quiet. After, the hallways cooled themselves as halls do when honesty passes. The walk to the Queen's apartments was long enough for 3 men to begin 3 different arguments with themselves and not finish any one of them. Robert walked in the middle, and on the outside of his face was nothing but a king's face, which is often a mask. Inside, small lords shouted in him. One of them had lioness eyes. The boy with that cried a name that it was useless to cry and sat down and did not get up. Cersei met them not in bed but standing by a window. The dress she wore was the color of some peach you only see in late summer when you have already eaten too many. Her hair lay about her shoulders like a speech written by a man who knows his own beauty too well. She turned and did not bother with a smile. Sheathed, that face was better than some blades drawn. "My lord," she said, and let the words suggest either equal or lesser. "I heard you returned with a prize. It pleases me you did not die in the woods with your friends." He remembered 100 of her smiles, and none of them the one men wanted. He did not play. "Your children are not mine," he said. She did not flinch as the word landed. She did not feign. That was something about her you could almost admire. She lifted her chin as if to prevent tears from falling that were not there. "You found your honor and brought it to my door," she said. "How brave. Did you also find your courage?" "Stark told you," Robert said. "Stark told me." She let her eyes go to Ned as a cat directs a look at a bird to make it remember it is made of meat. Ned took it and did not blink. Barristan stood nearer the door than the window and was a presence the way a mountain is a presence even when one is in the valley and cannot see it. "You will remain in your rooms," Robert said. "You and the children. You will not leave them without my leave. You will not speak to the watch. You will not write to your father or your lover. You will not bribe my men, who are men and therefore will be tempted to let you take their measure. You will sit. You will feel what it is to be small in the place you thought was yours. And you will thank whatever gods look at you that I have not yet done what the law allows me to do, because if I do it, it will not be with love." Cersei's mouth made a shape that had been pretty when she was 13 and now had too much will in it. "You speak of law," she said. "You who knocked up half your kingdom and called it your right because you wear a band of metal on your brow. Shall I bring them to court? Your smith's daughters, your tavern girls. That baker's apprentice who told me her belly carried the king's coin and nothing else? Have we a law for them, too?" Robert knew he could hit her. It would be simple. It would make a sound like any other blow. He did not. He let the hammer in him come to the lip and not spill. "Do you name your sin less because I have mine?" he said. "I have never been lovely. I have been hungry. You chose hunger with your brother and fed it at my table. And now I will choose to end it." Her eyes were a color men called green when there was no language for the exact way of it. She let them move to Barristan and then to Ned. She weighed the room and found it not to her liking. "You will fail," she said. "You never finish a thing. You begin and then the wine calls and then the flattery and then you sleep." "I do not sleep." "You will," Robert said. "If not of your choosing, then because I command it." He turned to Barristan. "See it done. 2 of your choosing at her doors. Men she cannot turn with words. If she breathes on a raven, cage her in iron." Cersei laughed then. It was a beautiful sound if you did not know what it meant. "Shall I scream?" she said lightly. "Shall I cry that my husband beats me? Perhaps the small folk will come and pull you down from your own steps. They love me, you know. I smile at them, and they think I am theirs." Robert went near enough for her to smell boar and boy wine and the iron that had ridden into his sweat and dried there. "Cry then," he said. "I will give them something truer to hear." She did not lower her eyes. He saw in her a kind of steel he had not seen in some men. "It was always a mistake," she said, very soft. "Marrying you. I told my father not to do it. He said kings can be trained. And you thought you could train your brother, Robert said. How's that lesson going? He walked out before she could make a clever sound from it. The hall beyond the door felt cleaner. He put his hand to his thigh as if to press heat into the cut and walked. Ned matched him. Baratheon stayed because vow. Renly had not spoken at all and spoke now as they turned toward the stair. You should have had her put in chains, he said. You should have done it last month. We could have seized the boy in the night and put him to bed somewhere with 4 guards who did not drink. You like night work, Robert said, too tired for the edge the words deserved. Have you considered that your fondness for the shadows might make you only half my brother? Renly flushed and then, because he was good at being what he was, made a joke with it in the privacy of his mouth and let it fade. I like breathing, he said. Shadows help. Shadows do more than help, Ned said. They grow when men make them. Robert grunted. Send for Stannis, he said again. If I must spend a fortnight being told what the law says I must do, I might as well be told by a man who sleeps with it. Have him bring his ships. He said ships with a gratitude that surprised him. Ships were simple. They floated or they sank. They obeyed wind and hand. Men were not made of wood and rope. He spent the remainder of the day in the necessary work of kingship, which is often the work of stewards. The watch was a stew of men who had come to a city's law because the country's law had lost their addresses. Baylor September had complaints about a fishmonger shouting in the morning when prayers were still being muttered. A woman in a pale dress with no small folk name had a petition about her boy, who had fallen from a roof while trying to see a tourney that was not happening that day and was now a boy only from the shoulders up. Robert listened and gave coins and promised nothing to gods, which was wise. Between petitions, he signed orders that became ravens and ravens that became orders. He had water poured for him and held the cup long enough for the man pouring it to look at his face. The man looked and did not see into it. That was for the best. Near sunset, he walked with no company but his own impressions to the armory yard. The hammer had been polished until the old pits in the iron shone like eyes. He lifted it. It was always heavy at first, and then the body remembered the ways of it. He swung it twice in arcs and felt the lines of his back answer. The boys in the yard stopped to watch. In their expressions, the world was new. They had heard the stories of the king when he was something other than a king. Robert, who fought like a river during flood and laughed while doing it and then slept like any man looks best sleeping. He swung again and heard his breath. He did not attend to whether it wheezed. He was not dying. He had a war to begin. Night came like ink spilled slowly. Torches made islands of light. Beyond them, the city coughed and murmured and told jokes in dark corners. Ned left him only long enough to bring him back the thought that had been with him all day, nestled against his ribs like a child half asleep. Littlefinger will pay the watch, Ned said. But he would like us to know he does not like paying men twice. Does he think I like it? Robert said. Let him count and groan. So long as the watch stands at our shoulder and not at a Lannister's purse. Varys has given me a list of doors in the city we may wish to place men near, Ned said, and that was a strange sort of gift to accept even from a spider. Let him spin his webs if they catch my flies and not my nose, Robert said. He slept badly and woke before dawn. The habit of rising for war came back, surprising him with its friendliness. He went to the rookery himself while Pycelle was still engaged in the solemn business of not dying quickly. The birds knew a king without caring. They pecked and shuffled and regarded him with the same indifference the gods wear. He took the message for Stannis and tied it with his own thick fingers to the leg of a raven. He held the bird up and looked into its eyes, which were as black and ordinary as spilled ink. He gave it to air because a man who clings to a raven looks foolish. The day that followed had the air of a storm that had not decided where to break. The sky was the color of metal left out. Men moved more quickly than the hour demanded. The kitchens sent up clouds of steam and argument. At the training yard, Sandor Clegane called Sansa a little bird, and she did not cry because she had learned not to where others could see, and Arya Stark slipped from her septa like water through fingers and practiced steps with a thin stick when no one was looking. These were the small unshakings of a city about to learn it is not a city loved as itself. It is a stage for greater things. Cersei remained quiet in the way a snake remains quiet when you have placed a stick near its head but not upon it. Baratheon put men he trusted at her door, and they stood the way trees stand on a ridge. She sent for Joffrey. Robert let him go to her and then sent for him back again, and the boy came with a chin that had been taught to jut. He looked at Robert and saw not a father but an obstacle. "I am king," Joffrey said, and he had a way of making the vowel in that word sound like a whip. "You are my son," Robert said, and the word took its time. "Take yourself to the Maester's tower and learn that a man is not made king by shouting." Joffrey's eyes were green like his mother's and held the same certainty that the world would work when he pressed it. He opened his mouth. Robert lifted his hand. He did not strike. He let the hand be the statement. The boy left, and the air in the room rushed back. At midday, Renly came with Loras trailing and news wrapped like sugar. "Lord Tyrell writes sweetly," he said. "He is still all smiles about you marrying his daughter last year, and he remembers the dancing." "Does he?" Robert said, and tasted the old decision that had been made for reasons that had seemed wise in the mouth and stupid in the belly. "He will not bring me men across half the realm because of a dance." "He will because the Lannisters are his rivals," Loras said, and the beautiful certainty in his voice brought youth into the room like a draft under a door. "He will because the Reach loves harvests and hates raiders, and the men in red are raiders with fine wine. He will bring you grain so your city will love you when your war eats its bread." Robert looked at the boy knight and saw the shining that is either ignorance or magnificence and sometimes both. "Will he?" he said. "Good. Let him bring what he likes. I'll pay him with red cloaks." He thought of Stannis at sea, drilling order into ropes and men until both creaked but held. He thought of Renly's bright company and of cold northern men who marched like a mill. Varys slid into council an hour later with the look of a man who has heard two things contradictory and found a third. "Lord Tywin has sent a letter," he said delicately, as if announcing the arrival of some hothouse flower. "He writes that he will happily come to court to answer accusations once the safety of his house is assured. He suggests, in a spirit of amity, that the Queen and her children might be permitted to go on a visit to Casterly Rock, where the air is bracing and the cliffs are very good for one's humors." Robert smiled until his cheeks hurt. "Tell Lord Tywin that I am braced. Tell him his daughter is well guarded. His grandchildren have tutors, and his son will look magnificent in my dungeons. Tell him I cannot wait to see him." He savored a pause. "On the field. It rained that evening. The rain in King's Landing is a different rain than northern rain. Comes warm and thick, and the stones let it run as if they are tired of being dry. The red keep took on a gloss as if newly made. Robert walked its outer ways with a cloak that took the water and held it. He liked the way water weights a man and reminds him that he is not made of air. Ned walked with him and said nothing and then said something that mattered. "If I do not come back from the Riverlands," Ned said quietly, too calmly for the words he used, "and you do send my bones north, do not give me to Baelor's Seps in their stone cages. Send me to the hills where men go to be forgotten by everyone but their wives." "You will come back," Robert said, "because sometimes men must call lies truth until the world grows tired and agrees." "The watch will hold," Ned said, "until it doesn't. Littlefinger will pay them until he decides the sum is better another way. Varys will let us hear what we need to hear until he needs us deaf. Pycelle will croak in your ear until a younger man replaces him and croaks better. Thrones are chairs for clutches. You became a poet while you were freezing in Winterfell," Robert said. "If it was that cold, you could have just lit a fire." They smiled in the way men smile when they love each other and know there is nothing either can do to change what either is. The rain made marks on their faces, and if there were tears among them they hid. On Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon received the raven and stood so long with the parchment that the servants whispered that he had learned to sleep with his eyes open. He went to the sea because Stannis went to the sea when he was annoyed with the world for not being simpler. It was iron gray, and he liked it so much he could almost taste it. He read Robert's words again. He had always known the thing about the children because Stannis was a man who knew the law before it was spoken. Knowing it again in his brother's hand did not change it. He summoned Davos Seaworth as one might summon a tool one admires grudgingly for its perfect fit in the hand. "You will go to King's Landing," he said to the smuggler knight, whose face was like a piece of driftwood carved by someone too honest for pretty. "You will take ships enough to make the harbor know your name when it sees your shadow. You will bring me there, and I will bring Robert what is his by right. A truth put into arms." Davos inclined his head. "I am Lord, and if the wind is contrary." Stannis looked at the wind as if it had insulted him. "Then you will make it otherwise." In the Riverlands, Tywin Lannister sat with a plate of food before him that he would not taste because he had eaten before he sat. He listened to a young knight report with wet hair and mud on his boots and did not let his distaste show, because showing it made men pay too much attention to your mouth. The knight told him the king lived. Tywin did not move. He lifted one finger and a steward stepped forward and took the plate away, because the meal was over now that there was something to do. "So," Tywin said, and his voice always made men feel as if they had not quite washed their hands. "We will draw him. We will make him believe he still has his youth in his wrists. We will let him bring his hammer to one place, and then we will make him regret choosing places at all." "Shall we send for more men from the west?" Kevin asked, as one asks about moving coin between purses. "We will send for young men who like gold and old men who like the thought of one last shout," Tywin said. "We will burn the places between here and his friends until those friends are late. We will not allow our daughter to be handled as if she is a sack of grain." "And Jaime?" Kevin said. Tywin's mouth was a blade turned on its side. "Jaime should not have needed saving," he said. "But he is my son. We will take him back from the notion that he is a prince in a story." At the Eyrie, Lisa Arryn read no summons and would not have liked them if she had. She walked with her son, and the boy watched a beetle on a plinth as if it were the world. "They'll come to take you from me," she whispered to him and to the beetle, and both ignored her with the same holy blankness. At the twins, Walder Frey counted the number of men he could send and still feel like a man when he looked in the mirror. The number was not high. At Winterfell, Robb Stark stood in the Godswood where white branches kept the cold like a collection they had always meant to show someone important, and he touched the face carved into the heart tree with fingers he had tried to keep from trembling. His mother stood near and watched him as if memorizing him. She had begun that when he was too small to notice and had never stopped. "The king will call," Robb said, "and my father will answer, and then I will go." "Your father will send you if he believes he must," Catelyn said. "Your father believes many things must be done. He believes in the word must as if it were a god." Robb smiled in a way that made him look both like his father and not at all. "I will go whether he says must or please. I will go because the north is not a place that waits at doors to be asked in. But I will go quietly for now." He put his forehead to the old wood. Somewhere the ravens had already flown. On the second day, Robert stood in the throne room and declared what had been decided in the sort of voices that fill stone with memory. The Iron Throne looked like it always looked, uncomfortable and trying too hard. He did not sit. He let the dais make him higher. He wore a doublet that did not pull and a sword at his side that he had not touched in a long time because he preferred his hammer. The room below him was a sea of men who thought themselves islands. The watch lined the walls. The court stood in its good shoes and its good breath. "Hear me," Robert said, and the room decided to do it even if some among them did not want to. "Hear me now. I am your king, and I say that Tywin Lannister has set himself against the crown. I say that Jaime Lannister, a sworn brother of my Kingsguard, has broken his vows and taken blood in my streets. I say that Cersei of House Lannister has betrayed my bed, and that the children she bore in it by another are not of my line. I declare war upon House Lannister. Those who would stand with the crown will stand now and be counted. Those who would scuttle with their schemes may start now and save me the bother of discovering them." The sound in the room was not a sound but a series of decisions made as breath. Men shifted the way men shift when they have remembered their spines. Some went pale and thought of ships. Some went red and thought of swords. Littlefinger smiled in a way that did not matter. Varys lowered his eyes in an exquisite demure. Pycelle wept because he could, and a tear on his beard picked up light like a small jewel on old wire. Renly stepped forward because Renly loved an audience. "The Stormlands stand with the crown," he said, and his voice pulled men's heads toward it. "We will bring our banners to remind the lions that stags still run when they have a mind." Ned did not speak. He stood and did not need words to claim the North's honor. The men around him did not cheer. The men around him nodded. Ser Barristan, who did not make speeches, put his hand over the lion at his breast as if to still it, and pledged without speaking that his sword would find the right place to point. There were no cheers. Cheering is for tourneys. Men left the throne room with their heads full of arithmetic and their bellies full of small fires. Servants ran to carry the weight of other men's choices. The Red Keep became again a fortress, which is a palace that remembers it owns arrow slits. Before dawn on the fourth day, a ship came black against the gray, and men on the quay felt that shiver that tells the skin someone with command has stepped near. Stannis came ashore with Davos behind him like a shadow that had put on boots. Stannis looked like the weather had chewed him and failed to swallow. He salamandered not at all when brought into the council. He simply took the place given him and made it his. "We will set blockades," he said before Robert could say he was pleased about the fine journey. "We will control the Blackwater. You will have command of the land because you are Robert and cannot be kept from it. I will handle what comes by sea. Renly may smile and collect banners in the south and ensure they do not arrive late and drunk. Stark will ride west. Tywin will force him to cross where he should not. He will try to catch him in a net made of his certainty. We will make that certainty cost him." Robert stared at his brother and felt both the old love and the old sandpaper. "Good morning, Stannis," he said. "Did the sea treat you kindly?" "The sea obeys laws," Stannis said. "Men do not. Tywin must learn. They did what men do when war is named not in whispers but in writ. They drew maps. They wrote orders. They summoned and then promised and then threatened. Men in steel spoke to men in silk, and the silk found itself stronger than it had imagined or else shriveled. The city bent itself. The ports became instructions. They filled casks and hovered them in nets like fruit. They stripped keys of children who had liked to dangle their feet in water that had not cared for them anyway. Cersei remained behind her door. News reached her and did not. She sat in a chair by the window where she had stood days before and brushed her hair until a sheen like tears lay along it and did not disturb it. Joffrey paced, because pacing suggests occupation to boys who have not known labor. Myrcella cried quietly at first and then not at all, and in place of tears she perfected a look that made men believe she had not cried. Tommen read a story about knights that had been written by a man who had never seen blood against the cracks of a nail. On an evening when the sky settled into the color of steel scraped by whetstone, Robert went alone to the Hall of Armor that his grandsire had hung with trophies to convince himself he had not grown old. The helms looked like skulls without their troubles. He stood among them, and their eye slots turned him into another piece of guilt. He put his hand on a helm he had worn at Ashford, and through it he felt the boy he had been. The boy had loved a girl he had not had and a war he had because they were both promises. The man loved meat and noise and the few men who did not lie to him, and now he loved the thought of a war that could make men honest for a season. "Lyanna," he said aloud, and the hall did not give it back. It took it. "Watch me," felt foolish and fitting. When he turned, Ned was there. The man had a way of appearing without the world noticing, as if the world had always meant to place him in any given doorway. "We march tomorrow," Ned said. He did not say it as if he were making a suggestion, nor as if he were asking leave. He said it as a man tells his friend the morning will come whether they wish it or not. "We march," Robert repeated, and said it until it was a promise and then a joy and then a weight. He drew a breath that tested his lungs. "I will lead the center. I will take the hammer into the field again. God, Ned, I have missed being a man in simpler clothes. "You are still a man," Ned said. "Your clothes are others' problem." Robert laughed, and the laugh shot through him like something warm and rough. They stood together in the armor hall until the lamps burned low and the figures along the walls regained their own lives, which were none. Outside, King's Landing slept badly. In Flea Bottom, a woman wrapped eel pie in paper and said a prayer to a god who watched over men who forgot to pray. In the Street of Silk, a whore with hair the color of wheat turned her head just so and captured a man's coin and his thought that he was a prince. In a dank barracks, a member of the city watch who had been paid that day rubbed the rim of a new coin and wondered if it would be better to be brave or rich, and then understood that in a city, men who are rich are never asked about their bravery. At dawn, the bells did not ring. The city does not like to encourage departures. But the men who had spent 2 nights sleeping near their boots rose and put their boots on, and the sound of straps being buckled made a music that can make some men cry. The gates yawned open with the reluctant drama of old men rising. Robert rode out at the head. He had Renly at his right and Stannis to the rear, with a hard knot of ship's men who had found horses for themselves and looked wrong on them. Ned rode with the northern guard that had come south with him and had learned to be both quiet and watchful. Ser Barristan took the white cloaks that remained to him and placed them where the eyes of the kingdom would note their whiteness. The stag banners rose and fell in the morning like grass bending. The road west did what roads do in that part of the world. It pretended to be straight and lengthened itself out of spite. Fields lay soft under a sky that was trying not to be fair. They passed children who had never seen so many men at once and would spend the rest of their lives measuring the world against that morning. The air carried the smell of turned earth and chickens and the particular sadness of small places abandoned quickly. Robert kept his pace even when his blood wanted the old gallop. He knew better. War had taught him that men must be husbanded like flocks and not ridden like stags. He spoke to his captains in a voice that did not suggest triumph. He told jokes that were sometimes funny and sometimes only blue. They camped the first night under a sky that allowed a handful of stars, and he slept as men sleep on the cusp of something they recognize from their youth. Deeply and with strangers in their dreams who had long since stopped dreaming. Toward the trident the land begins to remember. The river changed its mood twice a day. The grass held old stories, and men who do not hear such things still step around places without knowing why. Robert felt it as a pressure, like weather behind his eyes. The last time he had ridden this way in anger, he had been a different physics of a man. He had been a promise, not a ledger. He rode slower than that boy would have and with more weight. Felt right. He did not try to escape memory. He let it sit with him. It was an old dog that smells of rain and ash and sometimes farts when the room is quiet. He thought of Rhaegar on the other bank, all clean and princely and tinny in his silver, and of the way the hammer had taken the song out of him. He thought of the crown made of rubies sinking into brown water. He thought of when men shouted his name and it meant the thing itself and not a title acquired by one man dying and another being less chicken-hearted in a room full of lords. Ned rode near, and they did not speak for a long time because the land spoke enough. At last Robert said, "When I die, do not let them write a pretty line. Write that I was a man who made mistakes and some of them broke when I hit them, and some of them did not." "You are not dying," Ned said. "I am telling you what to write," Robert said haughtily, and then ruined it by grinning. "In case you learn your letters better than I have." They rode until the light went mean, and across the far plain a dust cloud rose that could only come from men who had decided where to go and in what number. Scouts went out like flies. Robert watched the specks become horsemen and the horsemen become banners and the banners become a certainty. Gold and red. The lion never hid its color. He felt his heart arrange itself. He turned in the saddle and raised the hammer, and a murmur went through the men behind him at the sight of it because weapons have lives beyond their owners and men know those lives in their meat. He did not shout. He did not need the sound for himself. He let the weight of iron rest on his shoulder again and tasted a blood he had never swallowed. "This is it," he said to no one and to everyone. "This is what I am good at." The simple honesty of it did not undress him. It clothed him better than velvet. They arrayed themselves with less ceremony than a tourney and more thought. Ned's lines went long and thin where the ground broke into little rises. He placed men from the Vale with men from the Stormlands so the accents would irritate them into trying to show better than the cousin at their shoulder. Stannis sent a note from the secondary line that said only, "Mind your left." Renly wore a feather, which was ridiculous and worked. Across the plain, the Lannister banners halved the field with their own bright. Men in gilded plate that would dent beautifully that day formed with an assurance born from eating every day and having their laces tied by someone else. Robert looked for Jaime's white cloak among them and saw it only once, a flicker, and then knew the Kingslayer was where any prince would place his best sword, at the point where men intend to move through the world as if it is their own. The wind turned just so and brought the smell of horses and men's armpits and nerves. The last minutes before battle are a kind of prayer without gods. Robert swung the hammer once to reassure the muscle that carried it. He thought of Cersei behind her door and of Tywin far off sitting like a plague in his chair and of Joffrey uttering the word king without knowing the weight of it. He thought of the boar in the woods and the way it had been itself and died itself without shame. He liked that in an enemy. He wished for a moment that the Lannisters were more like boar and less like men. Then he remembered he was a man and shook his head at himself. The horn spoke, and the first wave went forward at the trident. Grass bent, and little insects leaped out of the way because they had learned about men. Robert set his heels and went with his riders like a wave that has decided to remember being a mountain. His breath was a sound he could bear. The hammer rose, not as a symbol but as a tool, and when it fell it found what it had been looking for since a day when rubies went in the river. War asked its questions of the field, and the field answered. For an hour men believed themselves gods, and for another hour they remembered they were meat. Robert moved through it in the particular peace that sometimes finds men who have. He doubted themselves too long. Every swing accounted a little for years of wine and laughter and neglect. He did not become the boy he had been. He became the man he had always been, which is better. He rode and struck and shouted men's names so they would not die as if they were nothing but a line in a steward's book. When the sun slanted and the red and gold had begun to look like other colors than their house was proud of, he found himself across from a white cloak that gleamed in a way that made an old impatience stand up in him. Jaime's smile was there, the lazy one, the pretty man's assurance, and then it was not lazy at all. He had 3 men at his back and did not seem to know fear as a thing that exists in the world and not just in other men's mouths. They circled. Robert faced him, and for a moment there were no houses and no letters and no sad women in towers. There was a sword that loved its own speed and a hammer that loved gravity. "Your Grace," Jaime said delicately, like a man about to compliment a woman and risk too much with it, "you did not die in the woods. Someone will be disappointed." Robert did not waste breath. He did what he had always done. He put iron where the other man did not want iron to be. Jaime slid aside with a grace that would have made gods clap if gods were women at court. The first pass was nothing. The second involved a horse screaming. The third time, Jaime hit him across the shield arm and the shock went up into his teeth and told him something about his age he already knew. Robert brought the hammer low and made a promise to the ground. It shook. "Do you yield to law?" he asked, which was ridiculous and right. "Do you yield to truth?" Jaime asked, which was worse and better. They met again, and what decided it was not skill. It was the way men around them believed things. A Stormlander took an arrow aimed at Robert's thigh without apparently deciding to do it. A Lannister squire made the mistake of coming within the circle of 2 men who knew their work too well. Jaime's horse stumbled. The moment was not big. It was ordinary. Robert did not take time to admire it. He hit him. The hammer did not break him, took the air out of him and put him on the ground. Robert stood over him, breathing with sound he disliked, and watched Jaime look up at him with eyes that were worst when honest. There was no fear there. There was annoyance and a small, bright interest as if he had discovered a new sort of toy. "You will come to King's Landing in chains," Robert said, and then, because it mattered, "and live," he added. "Because I will not kill a man because he laid with a woman I did not love." Something like relief, a sliver no bigger than a fingernail, moved across Jaime's face. It was gone. He smiled, that easy old smile back in place. "As you command, your grace," he said, and it sounded like mockery until you listened. He gave himself into the hands of men who were rough because roughness is how men show love to their kings. The field groaned and adjusted. News went across it like fire through old stubble. The Kingslayer was taken. Men on both sides made the appropriate sounds. Robert did not pursue the route beyond a line he had drawn in his head that morning. He remembered Stannis's note. "Mind your left." The left held because Stannis held it with the kind of obstinacy that makes sailors fear and admire and avoid dinner. When the light leaned away and the ground had drunk what it would drink, Robert walked among the wounded. He had always done that after, not because he was better than other men, but because he was made so that he could not sleep if he did not. He touched shoulders and did not lie to boys who were dying. He told one he would take a letter to a mother and knew he would. He told another to shut up and sleep because he was too ugly to die that day. He passed a man whose arm had become meat and did not flinch. The man watched him with the gaze of someone who had traveled far in half an hour. He found Ned by the river, washing blood from his hands in a motion that said it had been a while, and the motion still comforted him. They looked at each other and knew, in that glance, what men know after they have done a hard thing and did not break or become better from it yet. Ned nodded toward the field where men in Lannister colors were being tied like bundles and set under guard. "It is begun," he said. "It began when Lancel handed me a wineskin," Robert said, and Ned's mouth made that small shape again that could be mistaken for humor. "Now we will see if I can finish a thing." From the west, in some place where maps put small letters and men remember only when they have bled there, a rider came with Tywin's new arrangement written in dust behind him. Far to the south, in a seat of roses, Mace Tyrell smoothed a page with his palm and smiled at his own cleverness. On Dragonstone, a woman who peered into flames told Stannis he would never be king because the king had decided to be a hammer again, and Stannis told her she did not know how to read. In King's Landing, Cersei took a breath and did not spend it on tears. She put her hand in Joffrey's hair and drew it back empty, as if she had touched a place where the world had not yet decided what it meant to be. Night put its hand over the trident, and the river went on being water. Robert sat beneath a tree that had seen men like him and had no stories left for them. He set the hammer beside him. His thigh throbbed. He was tired so thoroughly that sleep came like a favor from an old enemy. He closed his eyes on a field that would stink in the morning and dreamed not of Lyanna or of crowns made of iron but of a boar in the Kingswood, standing proud in its own mud, unashamed. He woke once and put his palm against the earth and felt it breathing, and it occurred to him that for the first time in a decade he had not lied to himself all day. He stood when the day hinted itself again and looked east where King's Landing lay and west where lions would lick their wounds and count and sharpen. His men were rising, their gear mumbling with them. Ned came, quiet, with the Book of Law still somewhere in his pack because he was the kind of man who carries truths even to war. Robert lifted the hammer. The weight was the weight it was. The world looked the way it had always looked when it meant to be difficult. "Let's go make honest men," he said, and set his shoulder to it. The second day took shape as if it had been waiting just beyond the hill for men to ask it what it wanted. The grass had the stale smell of trampled things. The cooks had turned an ox into a promise barely kept. Flies had decided that human affairs were not beneath them. Robert walked the length of the camp with the hammer across his back, and men looked up from their bread as if the whole notion of food had been made more serious by its proximity to iron. He stopped at pens where captives were kept, at lines where wounded lay, at carts where women with hands chapped by soap and grit tried to keep bandages clean in a world that did not love that kind of labor. He heard his name said like a prayer and like a curse and like a fact. Jaime Lannister sat on a low stool under a stretched canvas that panted in the breeze like the flank of a tired beast. He had been cleaned where he bled, because even enemies admire the work of a good cloth, but he wore no white cloak now. They had taken it and folded it and placed it with his sword and his belt in a chest guarded by men Robert trusted to sleep lightly. His wrists were bound with leather in a way that would chafe if a man struggled and would not if he did not. He saw Robert as one sees an old story told again, with a small interest and a better memory. "Do you prefer the stool or the ground?" Robert asked. "I sometimes prefer the ground. More honest. The stool and I understand one another," Jaime said. "I have learned to sit." Robert set himself on a barrel that had been persuaded to be a seat for kings, the staves straining and then agreeing. He gestured with his chin. The guard drifted just far enough that a clever man could not hear everything and not so far that a foolish one might hear nothing. Ned came and stood, because Ned stood by habit when the law had not yet been made flesh. He was not the sort to sit with a captive, even if that captive wore a face some women would gladly ruin good meat for. "You could have run," Robert said. "You could have found some little knot of your men and made a story of yourself until your father found you." Jaime's mouth made its old idle curve. "I have been a story since I was 17, he said. "It grows dull." "You are not dull," Robert allowed, "because truth does not turn poorer in the telling. You are a vowbreaker and a bedsharer and too pretty by half, but dull no. Tell me, will Tywin trade a river for you? A mountain? My father will trade the world," Jaime said lightly, and in the lightness there was a tiny iron sound. "But he will do it as if it was his idea. Will he come and apologize for what his men have done in my lands?" Robert asked. Jaime looked past him at nothing. "He will come and make the world apologize to him for being small." Ned's voice was a clean knife. "You will answer for oath-breaking." "I have answered for it every day since," Jaime said, and for a heartbeat he was not a court man or a Lannister. He was a soldier sitting under a piece of canvas remembering the color of light on stone. "When Ares ordered your father to be burned in his own mail, I learned what kings and oaths are good for. You think you have the law by the throat because you carry a hammer. I think the law is a cloak that slips off when a man sweats. We will both go to sleep at some point believing ourselves right." Robert found that his mouth had been ready with an insult and that he did not wish to spend it. "I will bring you to King's Landing in chains," he said instead. "You will live. You will learn to watch your sister grow old behind a door. You will smell your father's dinners and never taste them. It will be good for your soul if there is such a thing in you." Jaime laughed, and it was an easy sound that kept a little of who he had been as a boy. "If there is a soul in me, it has learned not to sit too close to a door. Bring me then. I've never seen the city as a guest of the king. Perhaps the beds have better fleas." Ned's brows pulled a fraction. "You mock," he said, "when you should fear." "I have been afraid," Jaime said simply. "I tire of it." Robert stood. The hammer shifted on his shoulder and cut a different line against his back. "You will have a guard. Not fools. If one hair moves toward a blade where it shouldn't be, I will hang you by your pride." "I am heavier than that now," Jaime said pleasantly. He left him to the habits of captivity and walked with Ned out beyond the tents to where the river bent and made a small mirror for a sky that did not wish to be looked at. The day had settled into the point at which even insects lower their voices. The smell of old blood was in everything. A penny taste at the back of the throat, a trace in the damp that lay along the grasses. Men say that you never wash that out of a field. It goes down and feeds things that are not crops. "Tywin will not try to rescue him with a small hand," Ned said. "He will bring a fist, and when that fist cannot reach, he will bring a fire." "I will let him find only smoke here," Robert said. "We march west tomorrow. Leave a clean garrison to hold the crossings with enough food to tempt them to stay and enough officers to make them do it. Stannis will hold the Blackwater and the Bay. Renly can dance and count our banners. You and I will find Lord Tywin where men like him go to feel safe. Harrenhal, perhaps. It suits him. He likes places that remind others of ruin." "We should warn the Tullis," Ned said. "Edmure has courage and not enough caution. Hoster." He stopped as if he'd stepped on a stone as slick as memory. "Hoster is ill. He will see war and not be able to ride into it. Caitlin will already be on the road. She will think she can bind fathers and sons and waters with her hands." "Let her come," Robert said, surprising himself. "Men fight better when women who know their names are nearer than winter. Send a raven. 2. No, 3. I do not trust wings when I can have flocks. The ravens went up, and so did other things. Rumors in the mouths of camp followers, cautions in the eyes of captains, prayers in ears that were not sure who was listening. The drum of march began. On the third day they moved. The host along the road took on the look a body takes when it has been asked to do more than is kind. Heat rose off them as if they were their own fires. The wagons groaned the way old men do when rising after a long sitting. Boys who had never walked as far as the next village learned that feet are sometimes unkind friends. Older men remembered that feet had never been kind and loved them all the same. Horses, who carry and never ask why, drooped and then lifted their heads whenever the road turned enough to make the air change. The banners did their work. They reminded the walking of what they meant. The crowned stag went before them, and Robert could feel the way men breathed when they saw it, like a truth they could take into their mouths. They made Harroway and then Pink Maiden and watched the world turn from fields to little woods where noise went to rest. They found 3 villages burned to their doorstep stones, and one with a single goat wandering its lane with a bell that had lost its tongue. They passed a farm where a woman had dragged a dead man to the shade of a tree and left him there because the day would not wait for morning. They met a septon with his robes torn and his God in his eyes, and he blessed them with a hand that still shook. War is full of this, small ugly acts that do not merit songs but leave a smell. News fanned from the west with the wrong smell. The mountain had ridden that piece of plague with hands. Gregor Clegane's work is stamped in men's marrow. It has a shape. Villages along the Red Fork told Robert's scouts before they told anyone else. One man had nothing left but ash in his mouth and yet found breath to say it. Lannister men burned us for sport. At a mill by a ford, they found blackened beams and a dead horse swollen so that its hide shone with a terrible brightness, and nearby, a child's shoe without a foot in it. At night fires, men told one another they would repay and meant it in different ways. At Riverrun, the Tully trout strained at its painted water under a sky that did not bring rain. Edmure Tully had ridden out too early and too proudly, and had been cut nearly to the bone and carried back swearing that the Lannisters fought without honor, and that it did not matter because honor would be theirs in the end. Hoster dozed and woke and, when awake, sometimes knew his son and sometimes berated enemies none of those in the room recognized. The Blackfish kept the house taut with a wire that did not show. He drilled men as if time were something that could be made to yield. When the Raven came with the king's hand in its lines, Brynden read it and allowed himself the small luxury of a long breath. Riverrun will hold if the trident holds, he told Catelyn when she arrived with dust and will and little else. Your husband marches. Your king marches. The lions come like a house on wheels. We will drag them into water where we'll sink. Catelyn looked at her father. He smiled at her twice in 1 hour and then called her Lisa and told her to lock up Jon. When she came out into the yard after, the Blackfish was there with a hand up to shade his eyes, watching the men practice standing in line and not fleeing. She put her knuckles into the small of her back the way a woman does when she has carried a weight in her belly in other years and now must carry other weights in other ways. Jaime Lannister is taken, she said, testing the world with the words. So I am told, said Brynden. It is almost a pity. Robb would have liked to be the one. He is my boy, she said uselessly. He is my boy, and the world is asking him to be a man in the way it asks when there is blood on the ground. Boys do not become men, Brynden said. They are told they already are, and then they learn to walk as if they believe it. He glanced at her. I will not lie to you because you were raised to hear truth. If Tywin brings his engines and his sums to bear on us while the king is still finding the right place to strike, this castle will be a place of cooked stones. We will not fall easily, but we can fall. Catelyn put her mouth into a line. It was not a hard line. It was a necessary one. Then we will not be here when it happens, she said. We will be elsewhere. We will be where I can put my hands between men I love and men I fear. I will go to the king. To Robert, Brynden said, and did not add the rest. Who killed your sister and called it justice by another name and has now found war again and is happier for it. Very well. You travel with men who will die for you easily. It is a fair expense. She did not smile. She kissed his cheek and smelled the old leather and oil and sweat that meant he had never stopped living the life he had chosen. A day later, she left for the camp with a small boat of guards and a bag of prayers that would be used up soon enough. At the Eyrie, the world had its own mad logic. Lysa Arryn received word of Jaime's capture and did not believe the part of it that would most help her. That her sister's husband now carried the king's face without the usual fool's smile. She sat in a high chair that made her look smaller and stroked her son's hair as if it were a thing that would keep him breathing. The boy laughed at a bird hopping and asked to see a man fly. On a lower floor, Tyrion Lannister paid a sellsword with coin and wit and asked for a trial that involved 2 men and a mountain and ended with one of them living. "You have a way of looking like a rabbit while asking for a wolf," Bronn told him. "Wolves can be persuaded," Tyrion said. "Rabbits can only hope." He left the Eyrie with mountain men who spit when they pleased and wore bits of steel as decorations. They loved Tyrion because he made promises and then did not seem to forget them when he turned his head. They loved him more when he taught them a word or two they could use to insult goldcloaks without being understood. They came down out of the mountains like a dirty flood and fell upon the road in a way that made smug merchants suddenly devout. Men on the river road came to Tywin Lannister with tales of tribes who screamed in a language the West did not care to learn and demanded meat and steel. Tywin did not frown because frowning is for men whose faces are attached to their hearts. "Bring my son to me," he said, and meant the one who had been told he was small all his life. When Tyrion came with his multitude of knives who called themselves men, Tywin put him at his table because it is not wise to insult someone who can throw a dead cat and call it soup. He looked at the mountain men with the interest of a man who appreciates sharpness no matter what handles it. He put his hand on a map. He took it away. He put it there again. "We do not have Jaime," he said, as if telling himself a truth he would not allow to move. "So we will use other sons. You will go to the city. To the city where my dear sister will be told how she will comport herself?" Tyrion asked, eyebrows drawing like half a bow. "It will be a holiday. You will act in my name," Tywin said, ignoring him. "You will the steward's chair and the keys to the purse and whatever dignity remains in that court. You will force the spider to crawl where you want him. You will make that little lord with the mockingbird remember who feeds him. You will hold the watch together with coin and fear. You will smile at the king until he goes away to throw his hammer at something else. And while you are smiling, you will keep your sister from burning the city out of spite." Tyrion swirled the wine in his cup and considered very carefully the color of it. "And when the king has smashed enough of our men that it becomes clear he can smash more, then you will even the count," Tywin said. "By making the city an iron bowl. The Reach will sniff. The Stormlands will remember some old slight. The North moves slowly. We will not let the game be only theirs. Go. Take whoever can read and is not a fool and 24 who can break heads. Sleep little." A man who sleeps in King's Landing wakes to find other men have decided his business in the night. Tyrion left with a shrug that had more feeling in it than he would ever intend. He took the tribesmen and a few Westermen who were good at keeping worse men in line. He took Bronn because Bronn had an instinct for where coin goes and why. He took a clerk who wrote fast and frowned at the spelling of names as if he had the power to change them. He took a priest who had decided in his cups to be brave. Tywin watched him go and gave no sign of any thought except that men should be about their duties. In King's Landing, Cersei learned of Jaime's capture and did not throw anything. She sat in her chair and allowed the comb in her hand to continue its path through her hair. The comb caught once, and she lifted the strands and found a snarl and worked it out with patience that would have saved a lesser person's life if it had ever been applied to something other than herself. Joffrey came to her, all points and pride and that hard-brittle look that comes to some boys when they realize that their mother's love is more than the world but less than peace. "They say he will bring Uncle in chains," he said, as if saying uncle were an obscenity the gods had not yet thought to ban. "They say many things," Cersei answered, and smiled at him with a sweetness that would break if touched. "Your uncle is not a man who wears chains for long. Your grandfather is not a man who loses things he owns." "I am king," Joffrey said. "I will not allow them to humiliate us. You are my son." she said. "You will allow what I tell you to allow until you are king in more than name." She reached and adjusted the tilt of his circlet. He allowed it and hated allowing it and could not stop his mouth from curving with pleasure at being touched like that. Sansa Stark saw Joffrey and still believed two things about him: that he was a prince out of songs, and that princes were sometimes rude because the world had been too kind to them. She stood in a hallway with a light falling just so and practiced the look that means nothing and everything, the one that allows a girl to pass through court without being bitten. Arya, elsewhere, learned to move with her thin little blade in the shadows of a stable where a boy who loved horses more than politics let her be what she wished to be for an hour. Syrio Farrell found her once and listened to her breathing and told her that fear cuts deeper than swords, and she said she already knew and was trying to teach her fear to swim. The High Septon received letters and orders and blankets of incense. He slept and woke and muttered about lions and stags and what the seven do when they tire of being asked for things they do not care to give. He allowed himself to be persuaded that the king's writ was the law the gods preferred so long as the king did not insist on bringing war into the sept, and he sent out 3 soft-spoken brothers to tell the small folk that sin was like rain. It fell on all, and some learned to make roofs and others learned to drink it and be sick. Stannis tightened the mouth of the Blackwater until ships squeaked coming through. He placed cogs in narrows and galleys in lanes where the wind turned on a word. He put Davos in a small boat and told him to go and look at the wooden underribs of enemy ships as if they were cattle at auction. Davos went and came back with a salt pulled into his beard and a look that said the sea had been speaking and he had been listening. "They're lightning to run," Davos said. "They'll slip cargo to move if we press. We can take half their bellies and leave them with the coats on their backs." "Take everything but their oars," Stannis said. "We will let them row home without comfort and call it mercy." "Do we hang men who fight for their bread?" Davos asked, not because he wanted to spare anyone, but because he liked to know the shape of a thing. "We hang men who steal our law," Stannis said. "Bread thieves can be whipped." He glanced toward the city on its rock and made a small noise that was not quite a disgust. "I'll have the harbor under my hand by week's end. Then we will know who feeds whom." Renly rode south to Storm's End with a parade that would comfort men who like color. He stopped in villages and let girls look at him and let their fathers decide that if they must die for a lord, this one at least had good teeth. Loras rode close and bright and altogether too sure of his limbs, and he made himself useful by remembering exactly where a path turned bad or a stream ran belly deep instead of knee. Renly wrote letters late into warm nights that said things like, "If the roses wish to see sunshine, they will turn their faces toward the crown and do it now," and Loras sealed them with a seal that had seen other brief hopes and still liked the feel of wax. In Highgarden, Olenna Tyrell read one such letter and made a sound in her throat like a hawk thinking about mice. "Marry whom?" she asked lazily, and Mace blustered about the right of kings to do as they will and the right of Tyrells to ensure kings remembered to eat. Marjorie stood by a window and let her face be the face men thought they saw and said nothing until her grandmother had finished making sport. "I would rather be a queen next year than a story this year," Marjorie said, which was not as cold as it sounded. Olenna smiled at her with love that had hard edges and kept them. "Good. We will talk to the pretty Baratheon. Not the fat one. The one with the good hair. The younger." She tapped Renly's name on the parchment as if practicing pinning him. "He will be easy to like and difficult to trust. Bring a leash of silk." In the small hours, Littlefinger stood with Varys at a gallery where wind wandered. They did not look at one another because looking makes such talks worse. They watched the city instead. The lamps that pooled in alleys, the brief flare that suggests a door opened where a door should not be, the curve of shadow on the dome of Baelor September like a sleeper's shoulder. "You pay men to hold pikes," Littlefinger murmured. "I pay men to hold their tongues. We both enjoy bargains." "I enjoy peace," Varys said in his mild way, "and the knowledge that in the end it is not kings who rule, but men in rooms who decide which door will open onto a set of steps and which onto a wall." "Until a king with a hammer opens the wall," Littlefinger said, smiling because he liked a man who knows his failing. "You are thinking about your own wall," Varys replied. "A wall where a certain bird might alight and never leave again." "I am thinking about a boy," Littlefinger said. 2 boys, in fact. One boy who thinks he is a king and another who will be told he might be a king someday. Boys have a way of requiring coin. And girls, Varys said lightly. Do not forget the girls. They require sharper currencies. Dawn painted a cheap gold on the canvas of the western sky when Robert's host found the first true scent of Tywin's moving mind. Scouts came in with dust on their teeth and said that a vanguard had been seen to the south of the Green Fork. Men described banners as if they had seen them clearly, which meant they had seen them quickly and fear had helped them fill in the colors. The lion's head was there, and a cluster of lesser standards, and a long tail of carts that raised an insult of dust. The shape of it said not trap, not yet, but test. Robert sent out the hounds with manies on their backs. Stormlords who had learned to love pursuit in reigns that other men curse. He sent Garland the Good and Bryce Caron and a handful of other men whose names sounded solid in the mouth. Ned went to the left with a line that bent like a bow but did not break like one. The day grew full of shouts that were too far to parse and the clangor that is loved by men who need reason and hated by those who have won already. They met at a little rise where a copse of beech throttled the wind. It was not a battle for songs. It was the kind of engagement that historians call an affair, as if war and love were of a piece. Men died in numbers that would later be called not many, which is an insult notice does not understand. The Lannister vanguard tested and found itself met with stubborn spears and a timed counter that sent them back to tell the main body that Robert had learned patience while drinking. Robert himself stayed where a king should. Not at the front where a stray dart can teach the world about chance, not so far in the back that he looked like a purse. He saw a banner with a red hand on white and frowned, mistaking it a heartbeat for something else. Then he remembered that the Pain Boy had been raised to sword-bearing and had taken a banner from old work. He asked a passing squire who that hand belonged to and was told a name he liked well enough. The hand fell, the lion shifted left. They were working around him, drawing him toward Duskendale? No, toward the line of the Blue Fork? They wanted him to cross on ground of their choosing. He did not oblige before he was ready. That night, Catelyn came into the camp, and the year rolled back and then back forward in Robert's face. She bowed because she remembered when ceremony was a comfort against humiliation. But when she raised her head, there was only the woman who had watched him take a sister he had never earned. "You have him," she said without preface. "Jaime." "It's true." "It is," Robert said. "He will not die today." He looked for anger there and found only a calculation of other things. "Good," she said. "He should live to answer, and while he lives, my father's heart will beat less fast." She cut her eyes to Ned and then brought them back. "You will not take my husband into foolishness." Robert felt the urge to laugh and thought better. "If I do," he said gently, "he will make me pay the price for it." She nodded because that was something both comfort and warning. She spoke to him that night by his fire, and the talk felt like an old cloak pulled over both of them to keep off a weather whose name they had forgotten. She told him of Hoster's dying and how a man becomes both more and less himself at the end. She told him that Edmure was too brave and that the Blackfish was as brave as a truth. She did not ask him to love anything she loved. She asked him to be a king and finished. Robert listened as he had not listened to a woman in a decade. He told her nothing of Lyanna, not because he wished to hoard it, but because Lyanna between them would be a kind of fire that burns the wrong craft. In the morning, she rode out toward Riverrun with 100 more men than she had brought. He watched her go and said to Ned, "The North and the Riverlands are like a marriage neither of us made and both of us must keep. They will keep themselves if we do not make liars of them," Ned said, which is as much as a hope can ask of men. When Tyrion arrived in King's Landing, he did it with courtesy and noise. The mountain clans poured through the gate of the gods and made small children cry and dogs bark and housewives throw buckets of dirty water at them in a sort of benediction yell. Tyrion peeled them off into a yard where a captain of the watch had been sent with coin that had already been counted twice. He kissed his sister's cheek in the hall of the Queen's confinement and allowed himself to be slapped across the face once because some things are ritual and helpful. "You are not to bring vermin into my city," Cersei said. "You are vermin enough. They will be out by supper." Tyrion said mildly. "They've eaten one pig already, and I promise to introduce them to the joys of boiled shoe if they do not go soon. I've come to empty your cup, dear sister." "You always were the funny one," Cersei said. "Go play funny with the spider." "I will," he said, and did. Varys received him with air and with the praise that sticks to nothing. Littlefinger weighed him and decided he would be lighter or heavier depending on how many knives he carried. Pycelle coughed and prayed a little and offered him wine that tasted like a good memory spoiled by current company. Janos Slynt gave him a look like a man counting other men's pockets and smiled, because to not smile would be to reveal sums. Tyrion installed himself at the council table and sat with his feet barely touching the floor and rearranged small matters with an air of rearranging big ones. He paid the watch and then paid them again and told them he would pay them a third time in the same week if they behaved like men who enjoy living. He wrote to his father with words that might pass through hostile hands and yet mean what he needed them to mean. He set men to standing behind doors and within doors and just outside them. He had a list of people who could be bought, and he produced a list of those who could not because he wished to hire them, but because it is useful to know where coin will not stick. He went alone to see Sansa Stark because he liked to watch illusions break and then mend in better shapes if they could. She stood for him as if he were older and taller and did not flinch at his face because she had learned better since the day she first saw him. He asked her how she passed the days, and she told him about needlework and prayers and songs, and a story she was reading about two girls who loved the same night and learned to be kind to one another when a dragon came and burned their village. "The dragon is the only true thing in your story," Tyrion said, and when she looked hurt and brave at once, he added, "It is a good story all the same. He found Arya by accident, which is a way of saying she found him. She was slipping along a wall the way cats think walls exist for them." He caught her eye and lifted a finger in a pantomime of silence. She returned the gesture as if he had been the one in danger of being found out. He stood for a long moment after she went, because she reminded him of a woman he had never met. Lyanna in Ned's stories, the girl with leaves in her hair. "Her father will take her away from here if he is lucky," he said to no one. "If he is unlucky, someone else will take her first." Robert's second engagement with Lord Tywin happened not in a castle or at a ford, but in a wide, low field where the ground betrayed men who did not know its small manners. The lion's host had managed to stretch like a cat in the sun across an expanse that looked kind to wheels and would not be if rain came. Rain came politely as if someone had asked for it. The field went to soup. Carts learned humility. Men who had sharpened their spears at dawn found themselves using them to test mud. Robert read the weather for the message Stannis would read, "Wait." He waited until he could see the impatience in the red line. They went forward when they should have gone sidewise, and he fell on the place where their wagons had become prisoners of their own goods. It was not glory. It was the ugly work that makes men hate you the next day. He broke axles and took horses and scattered teamsters with the thread of steel and only a little actual steel. He set fire to 4 carts of barley and 3 of small beer because he needed the smoke more than the food. He cut the lashings on a machine that would have thrown stones at men he loved and let its spar crash like a foolishly built mast. When Tywin felt the tug on his line, he shook his head once and pulled back. He left 20 men to die their deaths in a ring they made with pikes, and he saved 500 because he would not give ground where the ground was his, and Robert learned the lesson again. His enemy was not a man of one kind of pride. They moved then in a sequence of days and nights that looked, in retrospect, like a dance where partners change and the tune goes slightly wrong in the third part. Robert felt the old joy gnaw at him and then sit up and beg. He fed it just enough. He allowed himself to laugh with men he had never met until that week and to touch the heads of boys not old enough to grow beards. He allowed himself to forget for an afternoon that he had children who were not his. He did not allow himself to write to Cersei. He wrote to Shireen when Stannis mentioned her without meaning to, and the letter was dreadful but honest and spoke of a skull he had seen that day that had looked like a bowl left on a table too long. In King's Landing, the Queen's door remained closed and she remained open behind it. Barristan gave her the courtesy he gives to enemies who are not armed and to friends who are wrong. She tried her voice on him once in the 3rd evening, when the light is sweetest and some men can be made to think as their eyes do, and said, Ser Barristan, you have always been faithful. Will you be faithful to your queen? I am faithful to my king, he said, and did not elaborate because there was nothing in the world that would change the meaning of it. He posted Aerys Oakhart and Preston Greenfield and left Merton and Boros to sweat elsewhere. He prayed once in an old way, because he had learned to do that when Aerys was mad and because it was prudent to practice habits that keep a man from breaking. Joffrey tried to come to the door at midnight and demand entry, because midnight and demands live nearby. The Kingsguard's spear crossed, a polite line. Joffrey pulled himself taller and taller until he could not have been taller. I am the king, he said, almost breathless with the word. Open the door. The king is at war, Aerys said gently, and if Joffrey had struck him then, Aerys would have taken it and forgiven him and become his creature forever. But the boy had not yet learned to use kindness as a trap. He turned and went away and kicked a dog he found in a hall and felt better for a moment. What the small folk knew could not be contained in any one head. They knew that the queen was a whore and that the king was a giant and that the king's brother had come on a boat and had frozen the sea by glaring. They knew that a new tax on pepper was coming and that gold cloaks had been paid again and were therefore full of themselves. They knew that there were rats in the street of flour the size of cats and that in the street of silk there were cats the size of rats. They went on buying onions and turning them into soup and sometimes tears, and they told each other that no matter what men in red and gold did, eels were still a thing you could have in a pie. In the Vale, Lisa Arryn looked at the western birds and decided that the West was not a thing she liked to think about. She wrote to her sister that Ned should take his girls and flee the city because a storm was coming, and that she had always loved her, and also that she would be sending a small basket of candied lemons when the road was safer. She kissed her son and told him that bad men would come and try to pluck him from her arms, and he told her a story he had made up about 3 birds and a fox. And she said it was a fine story and then lay awake most of the night weeping into a handkerchief that had been embroidered while she had believed different things about sleep. On Pike, a man with iron in his beard looked at the sea and saw it with eyes that had not changed since he was a boy. Balon Greyjoy ran his hand along a chain that had once pulled down a statue and imagined ships like teeth, biting, biting, biting. The kraken stirs when the oceans of men go shallow. He did not write a letter. He did not pray. He walked along the cliff path and saw in the black, frothing lines along the rocks below the shape of what he liked to call a plan. Winterfell breathed quietly. The godswood there did not trouble itself with men's small wars. Robb Stark took a letter from his father that told him to hold for now and sharpen. He did both. He put men on the road that led anywhere without saying why and took them off again because reasons should be rationed. He heard that Jaime was taken and went and stood on the wall and felt both joy and the ache of a boy who had wanted to do that himself. Theon mocked him gently and then fiercely and then not at all. Maester Luwin wrote lists in his neat soft hand and told him the north was a big place and he should not try to put it in his pocket. On the 4th week of this new war that felt like one of the old ones wearing a false nose, Robert found Lord Tywin set up in the shadow of Harrenhal's black bones. The place remains the world's best story about overweening kings and the way Dragonfire writes better than men. The towers were pocked and cracked and streaked with smoke so ancient it had taken the color of bone. Tywin's tents looked neat around it, and the men moving between them had a clipped purpose that would not be harmed by awe. He had put his back to that ruin because he knew that some men would not ride near it, and others would ride too near. He invited Fear to sit in his camp as a guest and eat at his table without speaking. Robert paced his lines and spoke to officers while his eyes measured that terrible castle and the numbers around it. He could take it. He could take it badly and spend himself doing it and end with something that looked like victory and would be anything but. He could draw Tywin out. He could feint toward the fords. He could pretend to leave. He could. He looked at Ned. If I were Tywin, he said, I would have left traps in mouths I asked my enemy to open. If you were Tywin, Ned said, I would have left you long ago and taken my family to a hill where men still count the seasons by apples. But yes, he wants us to bite into something lovely and break a tooth. Robert settled his hammer into his palm. He could almost feel the boy he had been nodding and saying the thing that boy always said, hit the problem until it stops being one. We'll starve him of noise, he decided. Send men to worry his wagons. You know, the places where little woods grow. Worry him and then apologize with arrows. Let him sleep, then sing. Let his cooks count pot lids and find one missing every day and never the same lid. Make him keep his men in armor so their dreams chafe. They did. In the third night of this kind of fighting, a little company of Stormlanders led by a man from Rainhouse with a voice that could be heard in a storm came up through a drainage trench and captured 3 cooks, 1 barrel of sour wine, and a Lannister captain whose cheekbones had been admired by 3 women who would not see them again. They sent the barrel back first with a note pinned to it that said, with laborious courtesy, that the king apologizes for borrowing without asking. Tywin sent back the captain's cloak with no note. Robert laughed and then stopped as if he had remembered something and did not wish to examine it. Rain came again, not in sheets but in hands. The ground became dishonest. A little quarter-mile went bad, and a Lannister supply wagon loaded with oaten bread tried to pass and failed, and then caught fire when its own axle screamed against a spar too hard. The bread went into flames. Men stood looking at it because the spectacle stunned them. A northern rider came and flipped the wagon with a lever, and men caught the loaves and blew on them and ate them with ash on their faces and discovered that hunger is not fussy. A note went back with the report. The king's men fed on the lion's bread and found it underbaked. In the same week, news ran up the Blue Fork like a rat. Ser Amory Lorch had sacked a village that had nothing and killed a girl for speaking the wrong way to him. Robert heard it and stood very still. Robert of the Trident would have gone to find that man then and there and hid him in his bed. Robert of the Red Keep would have called for letters and law. Robert of this day set aside the hammer and took a quill and wrote an order under a seal that had made men weep out of fear and relief and sent it to every captain in his host. And it said that any man under the crown who raped or murdered small folk would be hanged wherever he was found, and the rope would be left up until birds taught the next man to behave. He signed it with a hand that had learned to steadier when it needed to be. He sent it. He slept a little better. That night he dreamed of Lyanna for the first time since the Boar Hunt had found a way not to kill him. She stood in a field of weeds with her hair half-plaited and the plait ragged. And she said nothing, and he said nothing, and he woke with his face wet and did not apologize to himself. On the morrow, Ser Barristan came to him with a little cloud of mourning hanging about his white cloak, which had learned somehow always to be clean. "Your Grace," he said softly, "the Queen asks to see you alone. She asks because she thinks asking means something," Robert said, and yet he felt a turn in his stomach that was like the weather veering. He went to her not alone, but with Ned's presence behind him like a wall and Barristan at the door like a truth. Cersei's eyes looked less green when she had not slept, which was to say they looked more dangerous. She had made herself beautiful, which is the way some generals polish their armor before a negotiation. She did not bow because she no longer needed to perform that politeness. "You will lose," she said without ornament. "Not because you are weak. You are not. Not because he is strong. He is. You will lose because you cannot hold your mind steady on 2 things that matter at once. You will fight and you will remember you like doing it, and then you will forget that there is a city and it needs to be held. You will go west and forget to lock your door. My father will come east and walk in." "I have brothers," Robert said. "I did not when I was 18. I have a hand. I have men who owe me things older than gold." "You have men with wishes," she said. "Wishes are coins that princes use because they do not have enough of the other kind." He took a step toward her for the sake of refusing to be spoken to from a distance. "You will remain where you are," he said. "You will watch what men do when they are not being pretended to. If you try to leave, I will place you in a tower until you hate the sound of your own breath." "You have already done it," she answered. "You have placed me in a tower. You have forgotten that I own the doors." She smiled then, a small thing that did not reach any of the places in her face where warmth could have lived. "Send my brother to me in chains if you like. I will send him back to you in silk if I must." He left her with the rage in him tamped hard and deep like powder in a barrel. He found Ned in the corridor and said nothing because there was nothing that would not become trivial in the air. "Stannis writes," Ned said, holding out a piece of paper. Robert read. The blockade was holding. Ships with Lannister coin aboard had been turned away or turned to the king's side with a judicious use of custom charges. The Tyrells were at high chatter with Renly and might send grain through on still nights. Stannis asked for nothing, an oddity, and ended with the assurance that the harbor could be made into a trap for any fool who tried to run it, which of course meant it could be made into a trap for them if someone with enough wit decided to reverse it. Robert folded the paper along its creases and clapped Stannis' sense on the back in his mind because Stannis would never allow it in person. He rode the line that afternoon at a long canter and thought about what would break first and who would be clever enough to look like breaking and be actually bending. He spoke to a group of men from the Reach who had come in on the smell of Renly's letters and a memory of the Mad King. He spoke with a man from Tarth who had a jaw like a cliff and courtesy like a bridge. He spoke with a boy from the Fingers who had never seen a tree not bent near the sea and was learning to love the look of beach. At dusk, a horn sounded in the west, and for a moment the pitch of it made his skin prickle, as if a thing from long ago had called his name. It was only a rally of some small company. Fear passes through a man like a shiver when the day catches him remembering. He drank water and tasted tin and was glad for it. Tywin did not come out to fight in a way that could be called a fight. He pushed and pulled. He let a brigade move too easily and then punished them when they moved again. He sent knights in pairs to test whether the king would chase men with bright harnesses. Robert sent small wolves after them and let his hounds sleep until the bright harnesses were bored and made a mistake. The war threatened to become a stale loaf, good for no one. That was when a thing happened that no one counted on because no one ever does. A foolish captain in Tywin's second line took offense at something said in camp after noon, and at sunset decided to prove something to men not worth proving to, and charged with 200 mounted men at the corner of Robert's right where a small marsh glistened like a promise. They bogged. They bogged beautifully. They bogged in a way that will make the gods laugh if the gods laugh. Robert saw their pennons slow like fish caught in a narrowing stream and called for the men from the marches to step in lightly with pikes like reeds. He did not bother to ride. He let the men who were not him have the triumph. The foolish captain died well, which is frequently the way with foolish captains. The Lannister line shivered and then settled and then did not move when commanding voices told them to. It was small, and small is sometimes enough. That night the lions moved. They shifted north along the causeway toward the Bridge of Seven Arches where the Blue Fork lays down and allows men to pass. Robert smiled to himself and tasted sleep in his mouth like a fruit he might finally be able to bite. He sent Ned. He held the center and the right and let the left stretch like a rope that a good man can walk without looking. He told his captains to hold their men close to the ground. He spoke to his herald once and told him not to make any declarations in the morning unless the situation was so clear that even a drunk could see it. Dawn came like a quiet promise. Ned's men were in the fog before the lions found the bridge's third arch was not where they had left it the last time they counted. Hooded men from the islands near Fairmarket who knew how a river fog works slipped in and put a cart where it should not be and then another and made a little corner of the world slightly wrong. The Lannister vanguard arrived intending to cross and found itself delayed the way life delays men when a wheel comes off. Then the first arrows came and then the second, and then the thing with arrows happened that always happens. Men begin to remember they have blood in them and then forget again when their friends are struck. Ned did not cross. He did not press. He stood and pounded the lions with patience until they fell back in a way that did not allow songs to be written and allowed the king to sleep that night with his boots off. A raven found them at noon bearing a letter in Tyrion's hand. It reported that the city was being held with a sort of enthusiasm that could be bought and that the queen had not burned anything yet. It said that the Tyrells might come with ships if Loras wished it, and Loras seemed to wish anything Renly wished. It said that the High Septon had asked for peace 3 times and had been given wine instead, which he had accepted with as much grace as he could find. It said nothing about dragons and too much about cats. At the bottom, Tyrion had drawn a little lion with its tongue sticking out and a little crown on its head. Robert snorted. Ned allowed himself half of a smile. "He is a convenience," Robert said. "He is a Lannister," Ned said, and the one truth did not cancel the other. As they made ready to press this small advantage into something that could be called a turn, a set of riders came in with faster breath than men breathe when merely tired. A banner of Tully blue led them. Under it, Catelyn dismounted without help because she had decided that morning that she did not need it, and the decision lasted until supper. She came to Ned, and they looked at one another for a long moment that was not for anyone else. Then she turned to the king and bowed the way a lady bows to a man she has known too long for it to make a difference and said, "My lord, my father sends his regards and his need. Tywin has held him in a sort of siege with the threat of fire, though not yet the fact of it. He weeps less when I speak than when Edmure does, which is something. The Blackfish says that you have made it impossible for Lord Tywin to be everywhere at once." "That was the idea," Robert said. "I am pleased to hear that I succeeded in making a man less of himself." She inclines her head. "He will not stay. He will find some other way to make us hurry. He is a man who never learned to like dancing to other men's tunes, and you have given him music he does not enjoy." "I will play louder," Robert said, and Catelyn's mouth shifted as if she had wanted not to smile and failed. That night, Ned came to Robert by the fire carrying the old book of lineages because he had brought it as a kind of talisman and could not stop. He sat and turned a page and did not read the words aloud. For a time, the two men regarded the paper where names become excuses. Finally, Robert spoke without looking up. "When this is done," he said, "we will have to say out loud who sits when I no longer do." "When it is done," Ned said. "Say it then." "Stannis," Robert said, and the name was a knife he both liked and did not like. "The law says Stannis. The law is right, but the people might say Renly because he is kinder to their eyes." "Kind," Ned said, and the word almost made a smile at its own expense. "Kind is not the same as good. Good is not always the same as strong," Robert said. "We will cross that when we come to it. The important thing is this: Joffrey will not be king. Those other children will not be queen and king. I will not allow my name to be hung on that lie. Do you hear me?" "I hear you," Ned said. "I will be the man who places the words where they belong when the time comes. And I will be the man who keeps your peace now." Robert reached for his cup and found water and took it like a penitent. He stared at the fire and saw a boar for a second in the coals, then lioness hair, then a hammerhead. He put the cup down and chuckled softly, a sound meant only for himself. "I am doing it, Ned," he said. "I am finishing a thing." "Finish it again tomorrow," Ned said. "That is how things are finished." In the deep night, thunder muttered over the mountains to the south, and someone's horse panicked and broke a tether and was brought back to its rope with more kindness than was necessary. Somewhere in the camp a baby cried, because babes are carried even into war sometimes, and a woman sang to it about a seabird who brings men home. A northern man with a face like old bark played a tune on a little pipe that no one recognized and everyone felt in their bones. The guard walked their lines. The stars did their cold work. Before dawn, the messenger from Dragonstone came with wind still in his cloak. Stannis had seized 3 ships bearing Lannister coin and had put their crews ashore on a salt marsh with their pockets empty and their lives intact. He would send the cargo upriver if the king desired and otherwise would turn it into bread. He mentioned, as a man mentions the weather, that there were rumors of ironborn sails seen farther out, and that Davos had told him in that rough, friendly way of his that the sea always grows claws when landfolk begin to shout. Stannis suggested that a messenger might go to Pike to remind Lord Greyjoy what happened the last time he confused opportunity with right. He signed it with the stiff set of letters that was both his name and his stance toward the world. Robert snorted and wrote back, "Remind him for me and remind him that I still know how to swim." He added a line that was almost tender about Shireen's lesson in ciphers and how he had found it good that a girl could make letters into knots and knots into letters, and then he scratched it out because tenderness on paper sits poorly in a war. At high noon, Tywin moved as if insulted by the daylight. He feinted toward the north crossing and then wheeled hard and went for the south in one long ribbon of steel that made the earth shake where it was dry and splash where it was not. Robert watched from the little rise where commanders pretend to be invisible and then decided this was the thing he had been waiting to hit. He sent Ned left fast enough to raise dust, sent 2,000 heavy-footed Stormlanders to sit down on the ground in a line so rude it would offend an artist, and he took 400 riders and did what men with iron at their back have always liked to do. He went to hurt pride. The day erupted. Trumpets cried with formal distress, and men answered with informal shouts. The Blue Fork took on the role beloved by rivers, shifting loyalties. Horses sank to the knee and came out and slipped and stood. Men who had grown up on flat fields learned new steps. Robert found himself flanked at one moment by a boy from Evenfall and an old salt from Massey's Hook. And their noise was good and their courage cheap, and he spent it for them carefully. He saw Tywin. He saw him exactly once, standing in his saddle with the economy of a man who spends nothing twice and looking across the mess as if it were a ledger with a column that would never balance. Their eyes did not meet because that is not how such things work. The air itself stood between them and kept the men they were from touching. Robert laughed suddenly and swung the hammer low and cracked a Lannister cousin across the shin in a way that would let him walk years later with a story. The afternoon went long the way afternoons do when they have decided to be difficult. In the end, Tywin drew away like a man who does not admit defeat and does not pretend victory. He left 3 standards on the field and took 4 of Robert's the next day in a small cruelty that no one remembered except the men who had carried them. He fell back toward the lines of Harrenhal with his men wrapped tight, and the king did not chase him into that shadow because he did not hate his men enough yet. He called his captains that evening and said in a voice that did not need to be loud, "Tomorrow we sit and we count and we send. I will not crack my teeth on that black shell for the sake of the thing inside when I can starve it and make that thing come out and beg." He looked at Ned and did not need to say what both knew. Tywin would not beg. They would have to make him move for reasons that were not hunger. They would. They were good at making reasons. And so the war, in that week, settled into the longest of its measures. In King's Landing, a boy king paced a room and practiced a frown he had learned from looking at coins. In a tower, his mother calmed herself by turning the same pearl over and over in a dish until it became warm and less like a jewel. In the Red Keep's yards, Arya fought an imaginary knight until a real one stumbled upon her, and she slid behind a rain barrel and held her breath and learned what breathing is for. Sansa put a stitch in, then another, and did not draw blood. Tyrion took his sleeve out of a candle and cursed and wrote a letter to Bronn about paying a certain captain to look the other way on a certain night, and then wrote another letter saying to do nothing of the sort if another certain thing were to happen. On the Mander, a ship put out from Old Town with a thin man called Paxter on board and a thought in his head that had calculated the cost of grain to the last crumb. On the walls of Riverrun, Brynden Tully watched the horizon until the lines of the land and the lines in his face were kin. In a small camp beyond the Trident, Jaime Lannister learned to stand and sit with his hands bound and realized that every time he stood now it mattered in a way it had not when he could choose. He thought about vows, which he did too often, and stopped because the thinking never solved anything. When the moon grew thin like a nail paring, Robert went to the edge of camp where the lights fell away and the night was its truer self. He held the hammer and did not move it. He let the weight sit in his palm. He thought of the hall of armor and the boy with an apple and the smell of pig fat at dawn. He thought of a woman in a tower who had learned to turn pearls warm. He thought of a man in white who would not be broken, and he thought, not for the first time, that it would have been simpler to have died in the woods and let men write a better line about him than he had earned. Then he laughed softly because he recognized self-pity, and he despised it. He turned and walked back into the light where men were and into the work they would do until the next day gave them different work. He slept when he could, ate when he must, spoke when he should. He woke into a morning that did not yet belong to anyone and decided again, as he had decided in the woods and at the Trident and in the hall where his wife sat like a golden knife, that he would not be the man who does not finish. By the time the Ravens brought him the next set of letters, about Tyrell ships bent north and ironborn sails seen for certain and the High Septon losing sleep and Stannis asking for more pitch, Robert felt the old rhythm in his bones so well that he could hum it. He called his captains and named a day on which they would move as one, not toward Harrenhal but toward the road that led around it, toward a small town with a name no one in ballads remembers and a stone's bridge no one writes of and a granary that would make a man like Tywin take a night ride. He set his hands on the table, and when he lifted them the wood bore little half-moons of his nails like a map of where his mind would go. And still there was room for what men cannot plan. In that next day, a rider came from the south with news that Renly had set his hand to a betrothal with a rose. In the day after, a ship was sighted in the bay with sails known in Sunspear and tempers known nowhere else. Dorne had not chosen a side but had chosen to watch from closer. In the day after that, a gold cloak with too much wine in him told a woman a secret too large for her ears and woke to find he had no purse and a new doubt of himself. In the day after that, a raven from Pike returned without a leg, because the bird had decided to fly where it liked and had paid the price, and Stannis wrote, "I will remind Lord Greyjoy with wood and fire if the king pleases." Everything bent itself toward a line not yet drawn, and the king moved along that bending with a foot that remembered mud and the sound of men in columns and the particular hush that lives under a beach when you are waiting to stand, and then go. Men talk about lines as if they are borders on maps or formations you can see with your eye from a little hill. The truer lines are not drawn in dirt. They are made when a man puts his hand on a thing twice in the same way, when a woman repeats a prayer until the word loses its shape and becomes a thread, when ravens fly along the same path so often that even the wind remembers them. The host moved west along one of those invisible lines, and the Red Keep held another, and Harrenhal crouched over a third like a dog that refuses to come when called. On the 5th morning since the bridge affair, the king's scouts came whispering that the lion had sent his teeth out in 2s and 3s. Little bands slid from the edges of Tywin's camp into the scrub and gone land. Some went north along the Blue Fork. A few went east, as if the very word Duskendale had been placed like a sweet in their mouths. Most moved west and south in ribbons light enough to be mistaken for nerves and heavy enough to do harm. Robert called a council under a canvas that sweated even when the day did not. The table was a plank on barrels, and the map upon it had gone soft where damp had done its old work. Men stood around it with their knuckles whitening where they leaned and with their eyes going back and forth as if they could make the contours tell them a kindness. Lord Tywin shows his usual respect for those who have less coin than he has, Ned said, his forefingers on the spot that showed Harrenhal, his hands steady, his eyes not. He will burn what he cannot carry, and he will carry what he cannot break. He will send word ahead of his riders with fear, because fear is cheaper than feeding men to get there. Then we will lean our own fear upon him, Robert said, his thumb smudging a village name without caring. We'll remind him of famine. We'll make him count days. Brynden Tully's men can ride his flank along the Red Fork. We take the road that brings his wagons to him and make it a place that eats wagons. Garland the Good, who had come with his father's grain and his brother's gay confidence and had only pride of his own to spend, tapped the map. There's an old bridge of stone at Stony September still worth the name, he said. If we hold it, they cannot fetch the Western Mills meal to Harrenhal without crossing farther north, where the fords are petty. Petty fords, Robert said with approval. I like the sound of those. Men drown in petty water when they think it beneath them. He dragged a stub of charcoal over the hide. We curve them here. We make the line and then ask them how they feel about lines. A courier came in with the look of a man who had swallowed his breath and not yet found a way to give it up. He had Stannis's stiff script on a ragged bit of paper that had once been neat. He set it down and stepped back with the relief of a messenger who has delivered the snake to its basket. Stannis had ordered a great chain to be drawn across the mouth of the Blackwater. The city's smiths sweated and cursed and prayed to Lawler and the Mother and any other god that might have anything to do with iron cooling, and the chain grew link by link like a story told right. He had also sent men to the Alchemists' Guild with an expression that had caused Helene the Pyromancer to wet his lips and bow deeply. Wildfire jars were counted. They were old and dangerous and plentiful enough to make a careful man nervous and a careless one dead. Stannis was careful and no longer young enough to be careless for sport. Davos wrote in his own hand at the bottom, "Let the chain lie quiet like a helpful snake until we need it. The river knows when it's been tricked." Robert grinned with a flash of old white. "There, Stannis will keep our door bolted. Now we make the lion step away from his." When the council broke, the sun was lowering and men's shadows lengthened toward the west as if eager to scout. In the lanes between the tents, boys carried bread enviably, and women with sleeves shoved above the elbow carried buckets and shouted at men without ceremony and were obeyed more often than not. A singer with no place to be sang a song about a girl who stole a dozen apples and fed a starving knight, and near the end of the stanza a horse outside the line of tents farted with such conviction that the men listening laughed until they forgot what the song had been about. In King's Landing, hammering rose up from the river like a prayer in steel. Stannis had commandeered the old craneways and put men who had spent their lives making anchor chains to work at something more elegant and more brutal. The chain lay like a serpent coiled along the quay. It was thick as a man's thigh and had been greased with tallow until it gleamed. Davos walked along it with his palm on the iron as if taking its temperature. "You'll have the trick of raising her in a hurry?" he asked a foreman with arms knotted like roots. "In a hurry, no," the man said bluntly. "We'll have her up in a reasonable time if the capstans hold and no idiot puts his fingers where gods did not design." "That is all I ask," Stannis said, coming up behind. He did not sweat the way other men did. Sweat seemed reluctant to release itself from him. "The river will be ours if we remember it is not our friend." Haleen the pyromancer approached in a bustle of dignity and caution combined, his little belly jiggling beneath robes that smelled of alchemical spices. "Your grace, the substance, it is volatile, but obedient when properly soothed," he said, fingers steepled. "We could lay a slick of it upon the water that would." "You will not waste a single jar until I command it," Stannis said, as if he were correct a boy who had been about to stick his hand into a fire to prove he could feel. "The city is made of wood from eaves to privies. I will not be the man who gives it to the flames by accident." Haleen bowed so low he would have toppled if not for his habit of forethought. As he withdrew, Davos leaned closer to his lord and murmured, "When they start making it into something, I'll watch it. I've seen too many clever things go wrong." "Cleverness has no place when you're fighting the sea," Stannis said, "which is why I prefer to beat it into obedience." Behind them, Janos Slynt and 3 of his gold cloaks watched the making of the chain with puzzled interest. Slynt had been paid more in 1 week now than he had dreamed of in a year, and had the air of a man who had stretched his purse and was not sure whether the leather would split. Tyrion came up the quay at an angle, fingers fluttering in a kind of salute. He had a roll of parchment tucked under his arm and an expression that said he intended to cause a problem and solve it in the same breath. "Commander Slynt," he said pleasantly. "How delicious to find you working. His Grace wonders if the watch might be persuaded to move 100 men from the Dragon Gate to the Mud Gate after sundown. The dockside is to be entertained with some rearrangement." Slynt jutted his chin like a butcher inspecting a pig. "The Mud Gate is none so rich as the Dragon Gate. Men like the richer places. Richer. Smells. Men will like coins laid upon their palms more," Tyrion said, drawing one as if plucking the moon from his sleeve and setting it spinning between thumb and forefinger. "Move them, Janos, or I shall tell the king you refused a sensible order made in his name." Slynt's mouth worked. He had grown comfortable with the Queen's favor and did not yet know the shape of the new pattern. "The hand is away," he grumbled. "Who signs for this?" "His lordship, the master of coin, has ink and an august manner," Tyrion replied, turning to where Littlefinger lounged against a pile of bundled rope with all the amusement of a cat who has learned that dairy turns. "Lord Baelish," Littlefinger's eyes played. "If it makes the city safer," he said sweetly, "and more dependable." "Very," Tyrion said, tossing the coin to Slynt finally, who caught it and weighed it with all the ceremony of weighing his own soul. "Move them by sundown. Bring them back by sunrise. The king need not be told every trifling detail if we achieve the effect he desires. If the king desires to be obeyed by day and night both, he needs men who will not forget by either," Stannis inserted, flat and sharp as a new blade. Tyrion's brow lifted, and he looked at the older Baratheon with a sort of sardonic admiration. "Then we'll keep the watch from forgetting by paying them twice and scolding them thrice," Tyrion said. "Between your discipline and my coin, Lord Stannis, we'll make of these louts something like a wall." "Walls don't drink," Stannis said. "Oh, they do," Tyrion countered. "They drink pitch. They drink men. They drink time. The trick is choosing what to pour into them." At Storm's End, banners that had been folded and fragrant with cedar were shaken out and took the wind with smiles. Renly stood upon the outer rampart and looked south into a light that made even the sea look kind. Loras Tyrell smiled beside him in that straightforward, devastating way that caused some men to love him and other men to wish they could pretend not to. Marjorie Tyrell arrived with the neatness of a plan executed well. She rode astride in green that did not quite match the field and laughed at something her brother said, and then let the laugh fall when her grandmother looked at her. Olenna rode in a litter but might as well have walked. She had that air of independence about her that makes conveyances seem ridiculous. Mace came last with a belly full of soup and pride, scattering words like grain. Renly received them with charm that felt like air. "Lady Olenna," he said, "your roses make my old stones look as if they were new. They may blush." "Stones are prone to that," Olenna said tartly, "especially when boys flatter them senseless. Your Grace, tell me why we are here besides to admire the view." "My bones do not travel on compliments alone." He liked being called Grace. He always had. He tried not to show it too much. "We are here to talk of feeding a city and starving a lion," Renly said. "And a ring." Olenna's eyes sharpened. They were not kind eyes, but they were just, "A ring?" she repeated, unimpressed. "Those are easily made. Some of them are easily broken. We prefer the other kind." "You'll want assurances," Renly said lightly. "I want to know that this is not some princeling's dream of covering his cousin's wife in blue flowers," Olenna said. "You are charming. It's unfortunate how often that makes men unreliable." "Marjorie deserves a crown that is not a story," Loras put in, softer than his usual. Renly lifted his hand, half in reassurance, half in promise made to himself as much as to them. "You will have grain," Olenna said brusquely, after the meeting's courtesies had been eaten. "Loads of it. The mander has been good, and the wagons are ready. We will send it up the Rose Road with men enough to make bandits decide they prefer fasting. We will speak neither for nor against the Lannisters in any place where anyone can hear us. We will make a marriage if the king wishes it when the war allows. You do not ask me to fight a man with dragons. You ask me to dress a table and attend a wedding. I am already dressed." Renly bowed over her hand, and his mouth hinted at thanks in the way that made even skeptics pause for the pleasure of hearing it. Olenna regarded him with the affection one has for a nephew who is too handsome for his own good and added, "Do not let the king die. Kings have an unhelpful habit of doing that just when arrangements become comfortable." "I do not intend to let him die," Renly said, meaning it in his fashion. The queen did not intend to remain behind her door, and so in the 4th week she did not. She sent for the High Septon. Barristan allowed it because he could not find the law that prevented a queen from speaking to a priest, and because he thought he could hold a priest with one hand and a queen with the other if it came to it. Cersei received the High Septon in a dress pale as wine foam and wore her hair up like a conquering general, and she fed him honeyed almonds and sorrow in equal measure without feeling either herself. "I am a faithful wife," she told him, with that little twist at the corner of her mouth that the unwary mistook for humility. "I am a faithful mother. Men in this city insult me by confining me as if I were a child or a criminal. I wish only to walk the gods' paths and offer prayers for the safety of the realm and my children." The High Septon dabbed his lips, which were damp, and spoke of the Seven's unfathomable will. Cersei listened and then poured him more wine and spoke of suffering. And when he left he believed for 1 hour that he had observed a saint, and for the rest of that day suspected he had supped with a wolf, and did not decide which of those truths would do the realm less harm. Joffrey came in as the High Septon went out and saw that men bowed to his mother, and not to him, and that from this he could learn nothing but spite. He kicked the table. Honeyed almonds scattered across the tile like little moons. Cersei did not even look. "You will stop doing that," she said. "It makes you look like a boy." "I am king," he said, furious at the fact that kings must say so. "They keep me from the yard. They say I must not ride. They tell me to read. I do not need to read. I need to be obeyed." "You need not to be stupid," Cersei said, and that was the only love she had to give him that day. Sansa gathered the almonds because bending and doing something with her hands kept her from saying things only foolish girls say or sensible women shout in the wrong rooms. When she had filled the little dish and set it back on the table with her chin determined not to tremble, Cersei looked at her and saw the use in a girl who could look at humiliation and steady her hands anyway. "You will read to the king," she said to Sansa. "Read him something about war that has a happy ending." Sansa blushed because she had been noticing lately that there are not many of those. "Yes, your grace," she said. She fetched a book of histories with pictures in it fine enough to please a child, and she read about Aegon's landing and left out the burning. Arya, meanwhile, had learned that the best times to move were when bells rang or when pigs were slaughtered. Sound made cover. Syrio taught her to step on the outsides of her feet and to breathe with her mouth almost shut. One afternoon, as she slid along the shadow of a stable, she found herself face to face with Sandor Clegane, who smelled of horse and rust and had a look in his eyes that always seemed to be looking past what was in front of him. "Little cat," he growled, "what's in your paw?" "Nothing," she said, and showed him the palm into which she had tucked the little needle she had been practicing with. She had learned that men like dogs will sniff what you present and not what you hide. He snorted. "You've got more sense than most of the peacocks inside. Run along and don't whistle at me." "I wasn't whistling," she said, and the look he gave her then contained a speck of something not empty. Rely horrible. In the west, Tywin Lannister moved a rook and sent ravens as if they were pawns. He hired a band of men whose leader wore his beard in 2 points and spoke common with an accent like a splitting log. They called themselves brave and were brave in the way men are when cruelty has taught them to fear boredom more than pain. Vargo Hoat took coin and orders and looked at a map the way a butcher looks at a side of meat. "Where are the good cuts, where the gristle?" "Go east," Tywin said, showing them where the king's camp lay like a stain along the river. "Go in when the night is loud with drink and when men are thinking of the women they left behind. Find my son if you can and take him out with his head attached to the rest of him. Kill no one you need not kill to do that. I am not paying for song." Hoat's tongue did a little wet motion that made even Kevin Lannister look away. "We go," he said. "We cut bonds. We make the White Knight free. If we cannot, we make him new and not good for anyone." Cha! They went in that night with pads on their feet like cats and a collection of knives that had names. The moon made a rim on the tents. Wine fires crackled. A woman somewhere laughed in a way that meant she had decided to laugh and would not be stopped by sorrow. The brave companions slithered like sickness. Hallis Malin had the watch on that side of the camp. He had been missing one of his front teeth for 10 years and did not believe in heroics. He believed in the quiet habit of looking. He saw a shape that did not belong exactly to any soldier he knew and did not fit the gait of a whore. He coughed, a little nothing cough, which was the signal he had worked out with 3 other men to say, "I am not sure what I see. Let us be sure together." They came like shadows with sticks for weapons, and then when the sticks were in the right place, the sticks became pikes and the pikes became men. The first of the cell's words pushed a knife toward the throat of a guard near Jaime and found, to his chagrin, that a northern hand had closed on his wrist with the sort of pressure that makes a man rethink any faith he has in steel. The second slid his blade through canvas and thrust aimless and hit the wrong man, who did not fall but screamed in a voice that told a dozen others how to find the throat of the night. Jaime lay on his pallet and listened. He did not call out because he understood that a voice misused in such moments does more harm than good. He rolled toward the crack in the tent as if turning in sleep. He saw a blade dark against darker. He kicked it hard. Pain lit his ankle like a torch, but the blade went wide. The man beyond it hissed with a stupid sibilance and would have tried again, but Hallis Malin's stick came down and made the agreeable sound of hardwood on skull, and then the agreeable silence of a skull occupied by other matters. After, when the dead were taken away and the living rethreaded their night, Robert came and stood looking down at Jaime with a face that asked no indulgence from anyone. "You have friends with poor manners," Robert said. "Pay better men," Jaime said. "They had the wrong soft shoes." Robert grunted and nodded to Hallis. "You have a new cup with my stag upon it in your pack by morning," he said. "And more men too sensible to drink loud when it's not their turn." Hoat got away with 6 and a cut on his forearm that would pucker and make a scar like a snake the rest of his life. He told Tywin that the king's camp did not sleep and that men in the north had eyes that opened in their backs. Tywin did not scold him because scolding is what you spend on men you intend to keep, and he had not yet decided. He dismissed him and made a neat note about guard rotations near the river, and then changed his mind and threw away the note because such details were Kevin's pleasure and not his. The next day, Catelyn came back to the camp not with petitions and pleas but with a look in her eye that made Robert think of axes put away in barns too long and then brought out again to see if they still cut. She went to see Jaime. The guards looked at the king. The king inclined his head once and then went away to let a woman do what she had come to do. Jaime sat with his hair loose and his wrists bound and his mouth easy. He looked up at her with courtesy that did not conceal anything. "You are very beautiful when you are angry," he said lightly. "You are ugly all the time," she said, so quietly it was worse. She drew a small stool closer and sat down and put her hands on her knees and looked at him. "My father's house is beset. My sister's husband is at war. You raped no one under my father's roof that I know of, and for that I will grant you the courtesy of one question asked plainly. Why did you take up your sister's bed, and in doing so put bastards in mine and in my father's lord's chair?" Jaime considered the merits of saying something charming. He measured them and found them shy. "Because I could," he said. "Because we loved one another. Because I did not love your friend Robert and did not wish to give him his heirs. Because it amused me once to break the world's idea of how things should be, and then because it became the only thing left that felt like mine." She nodded as if he had told her a weather she already knew would be bad. "And the child you pushed from a window in Winterfell?" He closed his eyes and saw Bran Stark as a little bird clinging to the edge of a nest. He opened them and saw a woman who would carry that small weight forever. "The world is very high in some places," he said. "We will both have to answer to gods for it." "I do not care for gods," she said simply. "I care for the way my son learned to walk with an iron under his skin and did not cry. I care for the way your choices keep turning up where I sleep." She stood. "You will not die by my hand. If you die, it will be because you made yourself into a thing that dies when men decide law must be heavier than fancy." Jaime smiled up at her then. The smile boys have when they jump from cliffs into water because they believe water. "I have always been more fancy than law," he said. "I will be interested to discover which of them the world prefers if it must choose." In the Riverlands, ravens hopped from branch to branch and watched men do things birds do not approve of, which is almost everything men do. The king's host folded and unfolded like a cloth being shaken and lay across the routes Tywin's wagons liked best. Ser Brynden took 300 light horse and moved as if his men wore leaves instead of cloaks. And in his wake the lion's messengers began to arrive late to their own thoughts. Edmure sent men toward the Blue Fork with orders to strike and withdraw before the Lannister main could turn its head. Every third man ignored withdraw because withdrawing feels like losing, and thus 3 men died to every 2 saved, which is the arithmetic of brave fools. Roose Bolton reached the camp then with a parcel of Northmen that smelled of the long way. He was not late. The North is never late when it is meant to frighten. He went into the king's tent and bowed just enough not to be disrespectful and glanced at Ned as a man might glance at a mirror whose glass he does not entirely trust. "Lord Bolton," Robert said, with the courtesy due to a banner who still carried a name older than many kings. "You come with quiet footsteps. Do your men walk without boots?" "We wear the air between our feet and your ground," Bolton said mildly. His eyes, pale and watchful, made some men think of ice and some of milky water that hides things beneath. "We came at Lord Stark's word. We find the lion in its field and the king in his. We find the lord of the Dreadfort with words that rhyme," Robert said dryly. "Will you sit and rhyme with Tywin for me?" "I will sit where you set me," Roose said. "I will rise when you lift your hand. If you wish me to bring cattle, I have men who know how to make men walk as cattle walk." "Walk them like knights," Ned said. "They are men." Roose turned his eyes to Ned and smiled with his lips alone. "As you say, my lord, knights, cattle, it is all how one speaks of it." Robert placed him on the night line where Tywin's men had been testing and found themselves pricked. Roose set pickets the way a seamstress sets pins and sent out 2 little parties of flayers to bring back tongues that could talk about movements. He called them messengers, and they called themselves nothing, and some men learned to avoid the place where his tent stood when the moon came up because they disliked the music of it. On the 8th day of that long wait, a dust line appeared on the far road, thin as hair but steady. The scouts came like bees. The lion had moved. He was not falling back on Harrenhal. He was not striking south for the Mander as rumor had it a week ago. He was slipping like a fish across the ford at Fairmarket with an eye to the Gold Road. Robert stood with one hand on a tent pole and felt the world do that little tilt it does when a man you respect for all the wrong reasons makes a cleverness that needs answering. If he reaches the Gold Road, Ned said, he can run wagons at him all day from the west. He can sail his grain to Lannisport and bring it by cart with an escort whose grandfathers were cuirassiers. He can sit and count and make the rest of us eat anger. He won't, Robert said. He found he was smiling. The curve of it was ugly and felt honest as a bone set properly after a bad break. He thinks he can draw me. Good. I'm dog enough to come to a whistle if I like the tone. But I'll bite where he doesn't want teeth. He threw the order for the march. Men cursed and smiled and cursed again because it is a strange happiness to be told you will soon have to run and die and shout and it will all mean something. The host shook itself like a dog coming out of a river and went. The king's center moved heavy. The left ran light. The right looked lazy and was not. They found Tywin not at Fairmarket but a half-day beyond, in a place with fields like skin just after harvest and a small stone bridge that some sensible lord had paid for a century ago and had forgotten to sing about. The lion had made the bridge his spine. He had wagons drawn up in a pen as neat as any steward's yard. He had men in a crest on either side and a calm in the center that could not be faked. Harder ground here, Stannis would have said, if Stannis had been fond of stating the obvious and present to do it. Robert felt it under his horse. He knew what you could get away with and what would get away from you. He waited for that little feeling in the gut that tells a man when the other man has decided truly what he will do. Tywin gave it as sparingly as he gave coin, but he gave it. Ned took men left, planting them like stones, and the north bent and held. The Blackfish came up with his little pack of trout and snapped at ankles when Lannister horsemen waded too far off the bridge onto November soft turf. They retreated with offended pride. Bolton stood off at an angle with his quiet men and did not engage until you forgot he was there. Renly had sent 2 companies of Storm's End's household knights north on Robert's order. They gleamed with that particular silliness of well-kept harness and then acquired scratches that made them into something closer to men. When he knew, Robert raised the hammer and took 400 and went darting like something heavy that refuses to be slow. He did not aim where Tywin would have set a trap. He aimed for a point of wagons where the oxen ranged behind had been kept too close to grid. Men forget that beasts are half the battle. He hit there. He smashed the pinion of order. He ripped a chunk out of the lion's mouth and threw it behind him with a laugh that was half boy, half hours at table when he had been bored and wanted to do something real with himself. Tywin reacted as a good man does. He did not react at all for the time it takes to be made a fool. Then he twitched one piece and rewarded some captain for patience by allowing him to ride forward and die very well. He turned his center a hair. He sent his right out like a tongue to taste the king's left. He found its salt. He pulled it back. It was the kind of day that kills 1,000 and makes no one a hero. At dusk, the field looked like a good plowed land with poor seeds spread upon it. Robert sat his horse, heavy as sleep, and watched the lion draw off with its order intact. He did not pursue across the bridge where a dozen small traps would have been laid for him because he had decided to finish things, and finishing sometimes looks like stopping. He let the enemy go. He took the bridge. He set men there. He waited for the next honest moment. That night he walked among the men without torchlight and listened to the intimate noises of an army sleeping. The little kicks of dreamers, the whispers of whores and wives, the occasional muffled cry that came out of a chest before the man could cram it back inside himself. He came upon Roose Bolton sitting as still as a post, eyes half-lidded, a piece of dried meat in his hand as if he had frozen halfway between bite and thought. "Lord Bolton," Robert said idly. I did not see you on the bridge. You were busy considering it from the other side, Roose said. I prefer to be where a man can see two banks at once. You like to see both sides, Robert said. Unusual in a Northman. The North is full of men who think they can stare one way and the wind will always come from that quarter, Roose said. I have learned from watching them squint. Robert grunted and left him to his meat and his half-closed eyes. He went to Jaime then, as the moon was at its height and friendly to liars and lovers and kings who wished to see their enemies without being seen themselves. You behaved, Robert said lightly. My guards still breathe. I did not have to hang a Sellsword's head over your tent. You would not hang a head over my tent, Jaime said. You would send it to Cersei. I would send her the whole man, Robert said. In chains, breathing, to make her learn what a chain sounds like when it moves against a man's skin. Jaime smiled and stretched. He had learned to sit and stand and lie within the little he was allowed with a grace that no one could begrudge him without feeling small. You talk about chains often, he observed. I carry a hammer, Robert said with a shrug. Men who carry hammers think of nails. Men who wear chains think of chains. Men who wear crowns think of their necks. Jaime tilted his head. Kings, he said. You intend to remain one. I intend to be better at it until I stop, Robert said. When I stop, the right man will sit where I did and my bastard boy will not be forced to die for the tricks his king did with a wine cup. Jaime looked at him then with something almost like respect. You are not as bad as your stories, he said. Perhaps that is why men like them better. In Sunspear, Doran Martell read The Raven 3 times. He did not rise. He had not risen quickly in years. The water garden sighed beyond his window and the sound made him feel both more and less alive. Oberyn paced, as men do when the thing they are is fire under a veil. He makes war with lions, Oberyn said with satisfaction he did not trouble to hide. The rock shakes. I should like to stand in King's Landing and watch our dear queen be confined to the company of her thoughts. You should like many things, Doran murmured. Some of them we may have. Some of them will kill us if we reach for them now. He lifted the parchment from his lap and let it fall again. The king is alive. The hand is not dead. Tywin is not dead. Any path we take that runs near those facts will have thorns. Elia, Oberyn said quietly, and the sea air went still for a moment even though he spoke the name only to the man who did not need to be reminded. The mountain runs on another man's leash. Your caution will keep him fat and laughing until he thinks to die in his sleep. Doran's hand shook once and then was steady. I want a world where our nieces do not have to become spears, he said. I will make it if I can. Sometimes that means waiting until the other men have cut each other down to our height. He looked up. Make ready, sharpen, drill. Quietly, we will be ready to receive envoys. That will be enough for now. Asha Greyjoy stood on a low cliff on Harlaw and watched her Uncle Victarion argue with the wind. She liked the cut of it against her face. She did not like the way her father stared west as if to force his will upon a continent by looking. He will go, she said to the smoke of her own breath. He will go even if it is only to remind them he has a ship. Alon's letters did not cross the water. His thoughts did. They slithered. On the seastone chair, he considered a map that included the phrase Cape of Eagles, and did a private, humorless thing with his mouth. The inn at the crossroads simmered with rumors like a pot that will, if watched, still boil. The innkeep served ale and did not ask men their business because those who answer never tell the truth and those who do not will tell their steel. A hedge knight in a patched surcoat with 3 quail upon it tried to sell his sword to a man with a blue cloak and was turned away because the man with the blue cloak did not even own his own bed. A girl with hair the color of good wheat asked a rider in a lion's livery about the weather and received a blow on the ear for her trouble and learned to ask questions with her eyes. A singer with a bad harp and decent voice sang about Prince Rhaegar, because there is always a woman who will put a coin down for that, and left with 2 coins and a bruise on his cheekbone because there is always a man who hates that song. When the riders wearing trout pins came in, everyone learned again how to look uninterested. When the riders in crowned stags paused only for water, the innkeep lied as well as he could. When a single man in green slashed with silver stopped for a dinner of eels and brown bread and talked in an unguarded voice to a woman with good shoulders about the sea, the woman looked at the shape of his mouth and thought about what it would be like to taste it. He left a silver half-dragon under his trencher, which is too much, and men with a mind to count noticed. Little things like that keep places like that in stories even when no one remembers the names. Then came a day with a sky that seemed to have no distance in it. Tywin was gone from the shadow of Harrenhal. He left fires smelling of tallow and old grain, and 70 men with no ears to tell a story about someone else, and an order in his camp so clean it made even his enemies angry. That a man should be allowed to move like that after such work is an insult. He had gone west along the Gold Road with men who did not drop their packs to pick berries. Robert went after him by the crooked way, the one that keeps your enemy always out of reach and always in your eye. In King's Landing, Tyrion found Jacelyn Bywater at the mud gate with his hand on a pike and his eyes on the river. Bywater's face looked carved rather than made, and when he listened, his whole body listened with him. "Commander Slint has a clever talent for finding coins on the floor," Tyrion said. "I prefer a man who knows which end of the spear takes pay. Would you like to command the gate and more?" "I like to command men who do not talk while I do," Bywater said. "You will like the mud gate, then," Tyrion said with bright teeth. "It listens. The dragon gate sulks. The king's gate thinks very highly of itself." He held out a little ribbon with a small brooch. "Take it. Wear it today. Pretend tomorrow that you have always worn it." Bywater looked at the brooch, at Tyrion, at the river. "I will take the gate," he said. "If you do not stab me in the back with this pretty pin, I will not stab you in the front." "Delightful," Tyrion said. "We are made for each other." Slint scowled when he learned of it and went to Cersei with his complaint and found himself called a good man and sent away with a purse heavier than the complaint he had brought. He did not understand what had happened but understood that heavier purses are better, and from that day he tried to remember that a Lannister's dwarf was a thing to be feared politely. Sansa read to Joffrey a story about a king who built a bridge where there had been only rope and the people loved him for it and then forgot to cross. Joffrey threw the book and said bridges were made for men to fall from. Sansa picked up the book and smoothed its pages and wished she could tell Arya something funny that would make Arya sneeze her milk. Arya cleaned her little blade instead and wished she could show Sansa how to make a man with a crown cry without cutting him at all. Ser Barristan went to the Sept alone one evening and knelt until his knees told him more truth than he wished to know about time. He asked no favors for himself because he had learned that asking for one's own ease leads to rot. He asked that he would not be faced soon with a choice between two vows. The stranger, amused, said nothing. The mother, busy, said nothing. The father, who is law, put his great hand over the old knight's head in a blessing that felt exactly like being told to continue to do what he had always done without complaint. He rose and went and did it. Men spoke of a battle at the burning mill. It was hardly a battle. It was a struggle on blackened boards slippery with old oil, and men fell without being struck and learned to hate the smell of oak after that day. The king did not go. The king sent men whose names would fill a steward's line and paid for it in the coin of sleep lost that night. The lion gathered again farther along the Gold Road as if nothing had happened. Men swore at the way that man made time do his bidding. At last, it was the kind of day that settles matters in a manner that does not satisfy anyone, which is to say it was true to war. Robert drew up his men where the road kinks to allow a hillock to go on being what it had been since the flood. Tywin chose to meet him there because there is a point at which retreat looks like an admission. The air was cold enough that breath had a body. The ground held. The archers on both sides had their way early, and then men forgot archers as they always do. The heavy snapped at each other as dogs do. The light ran and argued with themselves and darted in where courage outpaced prudence. Robert saw Tywin again, now nearer. He did not ride at him. He was not a boy in love with a song. He hit where Tywin had placed a lesser cousin to hold a place a better man would have preferred, and he pushed him until the cousin had the desperation to become one of the better ones and nearly did and then failed. Ned bent and did not break. The Blackfish saved 6 men in a moment with the sort of spear work that comes from practicing alone for 3 decades without audience. Roose Bolton's men moved like oil in water and did not mix until someone tried to set them alight, and then they burned the right thing. When it ended, it had not ended. Men still stood. Men still had food in their bags. The bridge behind the lion had not been taken. The bridge before the king had not been broken. Robert stood with his hammer in his hand and his heart beating in his throat, and he laughed once in sheer relief at being alive, then shook his head at himself and called out for water. He drank until it dribbled into his beard and did not care that men saw him so. Tywin withdrew, not in rout but in the good order of a man who knows when a day has given all it will give. He left 2 wagons pinned in a ditch and took all the men who had pushed those wagons into that ditch, because he does not waste those who can be counted on to push again. He left a banner tangled in a hedge and did not spare a man to retrieve it. He left his smell, which was smoke and neatness and the faintest hint of a spice Varys would have named if he had been there. He took with him a letter written in his own hand to a daughter who had been put in a room and told to become a thought instead of a person, and did not send it because that is not how he does such things. Robert let him go as far as the shadow of the next hill. He set men to eat, which is victory enough sometimes. He set men to carry others whose legs had failed them. He set a clerk to counting and a priest to comforting and a grizzled Stormlander to laughing at his lads in a way that made them love him. "You see," he told Ned as the evening's cold began to lay its fingers on the backs of the men who had not yet realized they were shaking. "I am finishing, not by breaking, by not breaking." Ned smiled in that small, deep way that men learn who have had to hold firm at a hearth and a gate alike. "We will need more finishing before winter," he said. "But this will do for today." That night a raven came, black as a hole in cloth. Stannis wrote that a dark fleet had been sighted off Crackclaw Point and then gone again. He thought them ironborn. He had doubled watches along the mud gate and put men on the city's walls at night who had not been trusted to stand there during the day. He asked for no men from the king. He wrote, "I will hold." Renly wrote less formally and more often. He spoke of Marjorie's laugh and of how the grain wagons moved with pleasing slowness, for slowness suggests weight. He mentioned that the Tyrell fleet could be persuaded to come up the coast to Duskendale if someone paid them compliments enough and coin besides. He signed one letter with a flourish that looked more like a sigh than a name. From Sunspear there was silence. From Winterfell there was a letter in Robb's hand that said only, "The harvest is in, we are sharpening." From Casterly Rock went letters that had no words upon them. They had wax and seals and were carried by men who walked with their shoulders back. Walder Frey received one and changed the way his sons slept as a result, because arrangements are as good as battles when you are old. Kevin received one and did the sums he had already done again and found them tolerable. Lancel would have received one if he had been a man who receives letters. As it was, he received bruises and a prayer from an aunt who worried after him sincerely and without the wit to be useful even to her own concern. In the Eyrie, Tyrion's name was cursed for leaving with mountain men who took poultry and ire in equal measure. Lisa dreamed one night that the moon door opened and the sky looked kindly upon her, and she woke to find she had bitten the inside of her cheek so hard she had bled. She kissed her son's face where it had pressed its heat to her breastbone in sleep and called for lemon cakes because sweetness makes some women stronger and some only sticky. She ate 3 and felt brave and then not. In King's Landing, a dog barked at the wrong man and was kicked and barked again and then stopped and was petted by a girl who had learned to pet without being noticed. A drunk fell off a wall and was not killed because the dung heap below had been new that morning. 2 men killed a third for a purse that held 10 coppers and a piece of string. The High Septon blessed a city that did not ask for blessing. The bells rang once for a saint's day and twice for a birth and 3 times for a rumor no one could substantiate later. The river breathed under the chain like a thing kept at heel. The next day broke like a plate dropped from a table. The crack was audible before the pieces flew. A rider came from the south and fell from his horse and said that Renly had made a marriage. The news already hung in the air. This rider merely placed it on the table. Marjorie Tyrell would be queen. Robert laughed in good humor at the phrasing for a heartbeat and then stopped as if struck. No, not queen. Not while he lived and did not set her so. He swore and then felt how useless that was and spun and called for a scribe. Renly is my brother, he said to Ned, the words tasting like metal. He forgets that, sometimes with all his sweetness. I will remind him before I send him cakes. He wrote, You will not put a crown on any head but mine while I breathe. You will send me grain and men and keep your bed clean of that pretension. Then he scratched out clean and wrote, Of that madness. He did not write of love because he had learned that love makes bad law. When the letter was away, he looked at the river and then the road and then the little hill where he had stood yesterday and felt something old and necessary and mean. He took the hammer up and checked its leather. He checked his horse's girth. He checked himself for anger and found it ready to be used if needed and ready to be set aside if not. Back to work, he said to the air, which was as good as a herald to men who had learned to take their king's moods the way they took weather, with a simple adjustment of cloak and stride. At dusk, the fires uncurled and men's faces glowed with that primitive look faces get when flame is near. Jaime Lannister lay under a patched sky and thought of Cersei in her tower, and the way her hair had smelled when they were 15, and of the way the world had closed around them like a mouth, and then opened like a different kind of mouth. He thought of honor. It came to him now not as a word men shout, but as a thing sitting in the corner, waiting. He turned on his side and pressed his bound hands under his cheek to lift it and slept. Ned Stark, in his own tent, drew the book of lineages near again as if it were a pilgrim's relic. He was no man for charms. He was a man for names and for wheat counted in stacks and for laws endured and enforced when the rain came and when it did not. He turned a page and paused over a name he had read a dozen times and never before noticed that a small line had been drawn above it, a copyist's correction in faded ink. The name reminded him that men are put into books by other men's hands. He shut it and set it aside. He lay down and slept badly and rose well, which is the Stark trick and a king's salvation. At sunrise, frost lay like milk over the trampled grass, and it made maps of men's footprints for a little hour before the sun erased their recent history. Robert took his army by the westward track and let Tywin see him go. He wanted the lion to know that the stag had no intention of turning back. He wanted him to feel what prey feels when the hunter goes past and then turns and never quite leaves its scent. It was then, when the rhythm had been learned by both sides so completely that a man could count it with his eyes closed, that something truly strange happened. It began with a raven that dropped like a stone into the king's camp and ended with 2 letters set side by side on a table that smelled of old bread and grease. One was from Stannis, in the writing made of iron filings and stubbornness. The other bore the sun and spear of Dorne and was smooth as sanded wood. Stannis wrote, Iron-born sails certain now. I will not be drawn. I will hold. The chain is ready. The alchemists have made too much of their toy. If you do not wish half the city aflame, restrain the dwarf. Davos says to mind my own business. Burn this letter when done. Dorne wrote, Sunspear watches. Sunspear counsels patience. Sunspear can be moved by justice more easily than by flattery. If justice for Elia of House Martell were to be made, the southern roads would find themselves amiable to your men. There are also lemons to be had. Ned read both and lifted his head. Robert sat with his hand spread on the Dorne parchment as if it might try to leave. The 2 men looked at one another across the little plank, and the world arranged itself for them to think in it. We can finish a thing, Robert said softly, and we can begin another. We will pull tooth by tooth until the lion eats porridge. We will keep our city intact. We will keep my brothers from making a mess of beds. And when there is air, we will speak to Dorne about ghosts. He took the hammer up again then. He did it like a man taking up his own bones. He blew out a long breath. He smiled without any laughter in it and yet enough warmth to make a hut a house. He went to tell men which way to walk and which way to run and which way to die. On the ridge above the king's camp, a fox sat a long time, tail tight around its toes. It watched the men move, and it decided napping was wiser than meddling. Closed its eyes. When it opened them, the frost had gone, and the world looked a little cleaner, though the men did not. And somewhere on a long road between wharf and field, between tower and tree, between what a man thinks he wants and what the world will give him. A raven that had been sent to Casterly Rock turned aside toward some shine of water and dropped into a copse of birch and was eaten by a hawk. The letter remained in the hawk's craw until long after the hawk itself had been eaten by a fox, which is to say, not all messages find their home. Some die between thought and answer, making quiet work for the gods that is no man's prayer. The line to stony September bent through orchards that had already been stripped and past hedgerows that remembered birds. The air took on that faint, cold cleanness that arrives between seasons, when summer's breath has gone but winter has not yet found its voice. The men walked with their shields slung and their mouths full of what talking they had left. When they came at last upon the town, it lay like a handful of stones thrown on a slope and left to settle as they pleased. The old sept with its squat bell tower kept watch as if it had been born there and would die there, which, for a building, is a kind of courage. Robert did not ride in as a conqueror. He rode in as a man who knew towns and the way they look at men who bring war with them. He dismounted at the square and put his hand upon the horse's neck until the beast stretched and snorted and decided there was grain in the world after all. Children watched from doorways, narrow-eyed. The innkeeper's wife, whose hair had once been the color of good straw and now was something like parchment, wiped her hands on her apron and did not quite curtsy. "It is the king," someone murmured, half believing, half making a story for later. "It is a man with a hammer," a boy corrected, raw honest. He lodged in the common room rather than ask the townsmen to produce some dusty hall they saved for dreams. The presence is heavy on a place. Better to set it down like a friendly dog by the hearth than let it pace the alleys, snarling. He sent quartermasters to their small mathematics and told them to leave the town with enough flour to stand up straight. He had water brought and washed at the pump in the yard where, once, he might have kissed a barmaid and been kissed back and called it a kind of sacrament. He did not kiss anyone. He scrubbed the blood from under his nails with a strip of rough cloth and stared at the threadbare sky and felt a peculiar peace, like the last inch of a wound that has decided to pull together on its own. Ned found him there, sleeves rolled, the old iron of Stark in his face. "The Blackfish says there's a ford a mile and a half west where the stones remember being a bridge but are not one," he said. "Tywin has gone past us. He thinks we follow him along the road he prefers." "We will for an hour," Robert said, drying his hands and pulling the linen over his head as if the act could make him more himself. "Then we will not. We'll cross where he would not. We'll turn up at a place he meant to be quiet. We will knock where the walls are not." Catelyn came then, her cloak drawn, her hair pinned without fuss. She had the look of a woman who has slept, which in war is the same as saying she has managed a negotiation with her own body. "A rider from Riverrun," she said. "The lions pressed at the tumblestone and then pulled away. My father has breath enough to curse them and me for telling him not to waste it." "Hoster has breath enough to do many things," Robert said, with the old affection the Riverlands can wring from a man who has once been fed at a kitchen hearth instead of a board of state. "We head him off from the west. Ned, take the ford. Brynden, make them think you're afraid to use it. Bolton, keep your men in their dark corner and then show them the light when it's least convenient for Lord Tywin. I'll ride the middle. I was born to the middle." "At least you were not born humble," Catelyn said, quieter than a jest. He looked at her with a crookedness that was not quite a smile. "I tried it. It fit like a boy's boot." At dusk, he sent for Beric Dondarrion. The young lord came with the calm ease of a man who has not yet learned to count his scars with suspicion. He had a face that had always looked like it had gotten away with something and meant to again. With him came Thuras of Myr, habit pulled crooked, hairline receding in a way that made his forehead look like ambition. "You rode well at the mill," Robert said to Beric, and the boy smiled as if the words landed on something soft inside him. "You like rough ground and bad odds. Good. I have a royal writ and a rope, and I want a lion's dog. The mountain kills small folk and calls it work. I will have justice for Dorne and for the Riverlands and for my sleep. Take 100. Take the Red Priest if he can be kept from setting his beard on fire. Find Gregor Clegane. Bring him to a rope or make a new tree of him." Beric bowed. The bow of someone who has practiced for the day when it might matter and is surprised to find that day is today. Thoros inclined his head as if he were greeting a tavern door. "We will bring you a tale," Thoros said. "Bring me a neck broken under law," Robert said. "The rest I can get at any inn for cheaper." Thoros grinned like a man who liked a king who talks like that, and then went to find his horse and his wineskin and to decide which one would be more useful first. When the stars were up, Robert called for paper. He wrote, in a hand that had learned to be careful when necessary, to Sunspear, "I will call the mountain to account and all those under Lannister banners who loosed him upon Elia and her children. I will do this not because you will march, but because I should have done it 10 years ago. If you will march grain, I will see that your people's blood is not the only blood remembered." He wrote to Renly, "I am king. You are my brother. That is more than a fashion. Wed whom you please. Give me men and bread and leave crowns for later." He wrote to Stannis, "Keep the chain sleeping. Wake it at need. Do not waste your fire." He wrote to Robb, "The river runs. It does not break. You will be where I can see you when I need you, but until I do, hoard winter for me." He wrote to Tywin, "Return my sworn brother to me, or he will live and eat my bread while I cut your house down." He did not send that last one. He folded it into a square and put it under the cup where the water beaded like sweat and left it there, as if the table itself could absorb the feeling behind the words and carry it to where it would do more good. The ford west of Stony September was a series of stones that had learned not to trust the river. The river did not mind. It made small talk around them and went on. Ned's men crossed at dawn with a politeness to the water that was half superstition, half practice. They took out a little line of red cloaks who had been chewing over an apple and assumed no one would come then. The apple fell and rolled and lodged, and a boy picked it up because he had never wasted anything, and he wiped it on his sleeve and ate it because men do not quit eating because a man has died near them. Robert came over the bend at his canter and fell upon the road behind the lion's tail. He did not strike at the tail. He worried it. He sent men to ride along both ditches and break spokes and take horses and leave harness. He did not waste steel where a wedge and a cursing teamster would suffice. He made the world difficult. In the late morning, when the sun had warmed not at all and yet made men wish to peel, Tywin's rearward companies turned and came back with a force that would have shoved any bandit into a tree. Robert didn't ask his men to be bandits. He asked them to be water. They ran where the road broke into a little shelf and then fell back to where Ned's line had already begun its neat, unshowy work of being a line. If Tywin intended to teach him patience, Robert learned it and then used it as a lash. For 2 days it went that way. The lion had to slow to watch his back. The stag didn't have to hurry to keep in sight. On the 3rd day, a 5-span bridge appeared like a story everyone had heard and then not. The stone arches made quiet of the stream beneath. There were flower stalks in the cracks that had decided to be there and would not be told otherwise. Tywin put his soldiers across with orchestral order. On the far bank he arrayed a wall, not too far, not too near daring pursuit. He would not be drawn. The stare of the man is a wall unto itself when men have learned to trust it. Robert drew rein and let the sweat from his horse run to the ground and be given back to the air. He did not chase. He sent the Blackfish north 3 miles in a long, low curve through an alder stand that bent its back to the wind. He sent Bolton east to stand where men would think no man could be patient enough to stand without doing. He sent Garland and Bryce Caron to dither like actors meant to hold the crowd until the jugglers were ready. He waited. When Tywin's line relaxed its shoulders, only that, Robert put his heels in and went. He did not go for the wall. He went for the wagons. He cut rope. He sent oxen crazy. He turned one cart not because the cart mattered, but because it made a shape on the road that other carts would have to argue with for an hour. He laughed hard once because he had done something cunning and it had worked. At King's Landing, a different kind of cunning burned its candles. Tyrion kept a schedule of bribes as if it were his prayer. He took wine with Haleen and used the word cautious enough that Haleen began to think it was his own idea to be frightened. He walked the walls and found rat runs that could move 4 men quietly from the Dragon Gate to the Iron Gate at night and set men he paid in tidy coin to make them tidy again. He went to see Cersei and paid in courtesy and got back nothing in return and accepted this because sometimes nothing is safer. He sent a note to Dorne with a little verse he had learned when he was 12, about lemon trees in winter, and smiled when he sealed it because he liked the thought of a prince with gout reading bad poetry and being mollified against his will by the stupid beauty of it. He met Jacelyn Bywater in the yard of the barracks and watched the man drill 50 with a cudgel. Bywater did not shout. He made a small gesture with his wrist when a man's stance went lazy and the man straightened for the pleasure of pleasing a master who didn't require him to be whipped into it. Tyrion liked that. He waited until the cudgels were stacked and the men dismissed, and Bywater came with that particular set of the neck that says the world can be made plain if one makes one's neck plain first. "If the king were to return suddenly," Tyrion said, strolling as if the idea had fallen on him like a leaf, "and the queen were to take offense that knives were not where she wanted them, would your men hold where the king told them to?" "My men hold where they are told if the telling is done properly," Bywater said. "Properly does not, in my experience, include cats or crowns. It includes pay and orders given while looking a man in the face." "Very good," Tyrion said. "Let us make paying and looking into a habit so strong even kings cannot interrupt it." At sunset, Sansa sat with a candle and mended a cuff that had been torn on a chair. A woman in the kitchen had taught her a stitch from the reach that made a seam hold like a friend who does not wish to be thanked. She hummed because humming takes up the space where crying would go. Joffrey came in, and she looked up in time to make her face gentle. He wanted to speak of trains and triumphs. He wanted to speak of heads on spikes. He wanted to speak of throwing men from walls to watch the way they turned. She said that heads smelled badly, and that men bounced unbeautifully when they fell, and that it would frightening to the small folk who loved him. He was mollified by the last part and took her hand and put it to his mouth as if kissing it, and bit, not quite hard enough to bruise, and smiled when she did not jerk her hand away. She smiled back and felt the little cold place in her that had begun to learn to speak. Arya had stolen a slice of pie from under a cloth and eaten it on the move, making almost no crumbs, which is a way of eating that would startle people at feasts if they saw it done. She slid along a wall where moss grew, and it dampened her sleeve satisfyingly. She came to the practice yard and watched from a niche where the stone had fallen away long ago, and Syrio was there with a wooden blade, and a boy with freckles stood before him with another and breathed in little mad pants. Syrio made him stand still until he would stop panting. Then, without moving his feet, Syrio made the boy realize he had already lost and that it did not matter because he could lose in a way that made him less likely to lose next time. Arya thought that was the truest thing she had heard all week. At Storm's End, Renly and Marjorie walked along the parapet in the late, violet light. The sea had thrown itself against the cliffs so many times that it had grown bored with the act and enjoyed it out of habit alone. She held her shawl at her throat with a hand that might have been a girl's hand if not for the way she used it. He pointed out to her the little light far along the coast that was a fishing boat and told her he had once thought it a star that had fallen and was stubborn. She laughed. He liked the sound and liked more that it could be shaped into something other than a weapon. "You will be queen," he said, because men who have been flattered from boyhood sometimes say things by accident that other men spend weeks planning to hint. "I will be married," she said, "and the Reach will feed the city while your brother fights lions. Both of these things are useful. You do not dream of crowns?" he asked, teasing, because he had begun to like the way she refused to take the bait he had been taught to believe irresistible. "I dream of a bed that does not smell of smoke and a hall that is not full of fools," she said. "Crowns come with both." He laughed. She touched his sleeve in a way that was light enough to be nothing and anchored enough to be something. There were ways to love someone that were kinder to both than the way Cersei had loved. Marjorie counted them and placed herself somewhere near the middle, ready to move as necessary. Roose Bolton's men brought back tongues that said Tywin meant to make a stand at a place where the road goes narrow between a tumbled hill and a line of larches that had not yet learned to turn. Robert stood on a chalky bit of ground and rubbed it between forefinger and thumb and tasted it because his mouth had wished to taste something bitter. "Good," he said. We'll put our rough men where his neat men will dislike them most. At dawn, fog came up from a low water meadow and made the world a smaller, safer room. The men came into it as into a tent. Even the horses liked it, snorting to see their breath. Robert placed North on the left, Storm on the right, River at center, and let the reach run along the edges like light running along a blade. He mounted and sat and did not move. Movement is sometimes the enemy of virtue. Tywin came with his banners aligned like points on a compass. He did not rush. He did not waste. He came as men come to a sum they know will be unpleasant and solve it carefully to avoid mistakes. The first arrows fell without romance. A man in a lion's coat laughed at one that stuck in the post beside him, and then did not laugh at the second that went in under the line of his plate, where the padding had been old. He died with a sigh, surprised, and his companion shoved him with a simple disgust because he did not wish to stand in blood that would pull flies. The first push felt like a thing between two great, indifferent beasts. One stepped, the other put its head down. The ground made its own noises, resentful. Robert rode forward not to make any speech but to look men in the eye and let them look in his and see a law older than this war. That men should not fail other men because they are afraid to be the one to stand. He turned the horse and let that look rest upon rows of faces, some fair, some ruined, some young enough to take comfort even from the look of a man who has done and seen worse than they. On the left, Ned took a knot of men from the vale and set them against a wedge that wanted to be a knife. They became wood instead. The wedge blunted, then frayed, then was something else entirely. On the right, Stormlords ran forward and then stopped short together on an invisible line, and their stopping broke the rhythm of the Lannister horse, which had meant to flow through and found itself puddled. In the center, Brynden kept the river in his head and trickled and filled and did not rush. Bolton was a cold thought that stayed cold and then, at the moment when hot would have been expected, became colder still. Robert rode the way men ride when their bodies have kept accounts and are now prepared to pay. He did not shine. He did not try to. He put iron where bone made noise. He watched out of the corner of his eye the way lines sag. He sent Garland at the one point where the sag would not recover and turned a nearly into an is. Tywin, on the far bank of men, signaled a withdrawal that looked like a ripening and not a retreat. He almost made it clean. Almost is a poor word for a man like that. He left a third of a company in the wrong ditch and a captain with a good hand on order beneath a horse that had broken its leg stepping in the hole it had made for itself. He left the sound of his own banner falling somewhere in the noise, and if he heard it his face gave no sign. When the fog burned off at last, the day was shorter and tasteless. The field looked like every field after work has been done, untidy, stubborn, alive. Robert sat and let someone pour water on his wrists, and the dirt spun off and made its own world in the shallow bowl. He breathed and felt the tightness behind his heart ease, as if someone had opened a window there. He did not pursue into the narrowing where the road climbed and the larches would have made little knife points overhead. He did not bother telling the men why. He knew some would be angry at being denied the sprint. Men forgive a king almost anything if he gives them food and a reason later. He ate bread torn from a loaf with salt in it, and it returned to his mouth the taste of flour ground where the river speaks slow. He remembered Lyanna there, as always when he was not looking for her. The memory did not tear him. It set like a piece of old glass into a wall and let light through in a way not intended but beautiful all the same. In the evening, with cook smoke low and the talk in the camp taking back its own pace, a rider came with the look of a man who had not dared to slow long enough to be properly afraid. He bore the Fry colors and a personal token no one cared for, a dozen little chevrons that promised many sons without promising any great man among them. He wanted Catelyn Stark and found her because she had a way of being where she should be, the way water finds its level. He said that Lord Walder offered crossings for the north in exchange for commonplace, ordinary dignities entirely out of proportion to his bridge. He said that the young wolf had turned south from Winterfell with a cleanness that made a good many northern men proud to feel their bellies emptying at a quicker rate. Catelyn read Walder's little, mean words and closed her eyes and opened them and smiled, because life continues to ask the same small prices even when kings are busy with large ones. "I will go," she said to Ned, and when he frowned she added, "I will not stab him. I will stroke his pride with 2 fingers and then count my own. Robb cannot spend the winter on the wrong side of my father's rivers." Robert heard and nodded. "Go," he said. "Bring me a crossing I do not have to repay with a crown. Tell the old man I remember how he hides meat under gruel. Tell him if he makes me cross his bridge, I will eat from his pot with my hands and lick my fingers after and leave nothing for him to sniff. I will tell him nothing so common," she said, and kissed Ned on the mouth in the way of a woman who has learned not to apologize for loving a man where others may see. In the morning she went with a light company and a bag full of patience. The dawn seemed to like her. Jaime, in his tent with air going in and out of it like a sleeping thing, lay awake and counted the mistakes he had made and the pleasure he had taken in making them. He had been young at first, and then the pleasure had become a way to avoid being old. He smiled at the ceiling, at his own arrogance, at the fact of ropes. He thought of Cersei, of the way she had leaned the last time he had seen her, as if gravity were a lover. He tried to think of the king as something other than an obstacle and did not quite manage it. He thought of Ned Stark's mouth around the word law, and he thought of Ser Barristan's hand on a sword hilt and how still it was, how still. In the quiet hours most useful to regrets, Barristan came, and they looked at one another with an understanding that there are only so many men left who remember the exact smell of Aerys's rooms at noon in the summer. "You killed a king," Barristan said, without heat. "I killed a fire," Jaime said. "It wore a crown. I would do it again." Barristan inclined his head, and in that half-inch there were 3 vows, 7 injuries, and 10 small kindnesses. "I am glad of it," he said. "I only wish you had not killed the idea of a Kingsguard when you did." "It needed killing," Jaime replied with a tired cheerfulness. "You have spent your life sharpening it and hiding the rust from yourself. Look upon me. I am what the Order became." "You are what men say about us when no one is listening," Barristan corrected gently. "Men can be wrong." Jaime laughed. "We will see how wrong I am when we are both ghosts and the boys ask us what our lives were for. You will say you obeyed. I will say I did as I pleased. They will put us on either side of a fable and take from it whatever kind of sleep they need." Barristan did not smile. He looked at Jaime with the kind of pity that scratches. "You should have been a great knight," he said. "I was," Jaime said brightly. "In my own story." Tywin left the narrow valley and found the wider road to Sarsfield and the smell of his own lands, which for a certain sort of man is the only smell that can comfort. He wrote to Casterly Rock and told them to empty certain cellars and send certain men and keep the bells quiet. He wrote to Duskendale and instructed that nothing of value be sent toward King's Landing without escort, and that any man who proposed to move anything of value without telling a Lannister first should have his beard shaved in the street. He wrote to Cersei, then did not seal the letter, then did, then set it down. He wrote to Tyrion and sealed it and sent it and told himself he would not be surprised by that boy's answer and knew that he would be, because Tyrion had made a habit of surprising men who thought themselves immune to such things. In the Iron Islands, the priests of the drowned god lowered a young man into a tub of salt and said men had forgotten the old ways and that forgetting had made them bad husbands. Victarion beat a drum with the calm of someone who knows how to beat things whether he is asked to or not. Asha stood on the shore and spat, because she had no patience for men who liked to pretend that the sea would pat their heads for being faithful. Balon raised his hands with their long bones like hooks and declared that when men on the green lands fought like dogs over scraps, the kraken would come and take the whole carcass. The sea came in and went out without caring. On the road to the twins, Catelyn rode with Bryndon's man Eutherin, who could make horses step more softly without touching them, and with 6 rivermen who had the gift of moving through their own land as if it were in their blood. She thought about Walder Frey, about the way the old fox would hiss and preen and demand and hold back. She thought about how to smile without showing teeth. She thought about Robb, and then stopped thinking about Robb and thought about when he had been 6 and had taken a fall off the low wall at Winterfell, and had not cried until she had come running, and then had cried as if it were a duty he must fulfill. She prayed, but not to the 7. She prayed to the stubbornness of stone bridges and to the way men sometimes do not change until they have to. She prayed to the gods wood at Winterfell and to its cold, honest eye. At King's Landing, the chain lay at the bottom of the river like something old and alive and waiting. Davos took a skiff out at dusk and let his fingers trail in the greasy water and watched rats nose along pilings with more boldness than he liked. "We'll need lures," he told Stannis. "Something to make fools fast and clever men slow. Something bright." "The city has too much bright," Stannis said. "Men stare at it and forget how to count." "We will count for them," Davos said. "I was not born to numbers, but I can add fear to weight." Stannis looked at him, hard, perhaps grateful, perhaps simply marking in his own unyielding account book that there was a thing done and a man to write beside it. "You do a smuggler's work for a king," he said. "I do a king's work for a smuggler," Davos replied, and Stannis's mouth twitched once, which on his face was equal to laughter in another man's. Tyrion, candlelight on his nose, wrote a list of names and ran his finger down it and put a cross next to 3 men in the watch who had wives with certain tastes and another cross next to 2 who had no wives and other tastes and a circle around one who loved no one but his mother and was therefore incorruptible. He sighed and drew a little fish in the margin. He thought about Casterly Rock and went to the window and looked out at a city that had been his for a week and would be his for more and never his at all. He wondered how often men had made that thought. He wondered if Varys had kept a list of it somewhere. Varys did keep lists. He visited Cersei and said nothing of use and left a small vial of something useless, and she smiled with pure cant. Emptied and set it on a shelf and later poured it down the privy because the act comforted her. He went to Joffrey and spoke of falconry and accompanied the boy to the mews and watched the prince handle a bird without cruelty for 10 minutes. And then the boy lost interest and pulled the jesses too hard and the bird struck and Joffrey struck back and the keeper spoke a word he should not have spoken and lost his position and perhaps his teeth, and Varys smiled at the boy and said, "Majesty," as if he meant something, and left and later wrote in his book, "The boy might be taught to love. Only one thing at a time. Perhaps we choose the thing." The Brotherhood without banners left King's Justice like a candle behind them and went into the green in 2s and 3s. Thuras sang to his horse off-key and cupped the wind with his palm as if he could take it with him. Beric smiled the way a man smiles when he is for the first time doing exactly what he thought he might one day do. They came to a village and found it empty in a way that suggests emptiness has been recently practiced. They came to a mill and found a boy with a split lip and a woman with her dress torn, and did not ask their names until they had put bread into their hands and water into their mouths. They asked for news of a great, tall man with murder in him and were told a story that had already been told in 6 other places. They turned their horses and went toward it again, as men go toward an itch. On the 5th day out of stony September, Robert stood on a ridge and looked west toward a sky that had gathered itself like a fist and then decided, mercifully, to open. Rain came, not heavy but numerous. Men pulled their cloaks over their heads and waited to see if it would be a storm worth cursing or a conversation worth ignoring. It was the latter. He breathed. The rain made his beard smell like wool and animal and a little like iron, which was not unpleasant. He saw ahead of him a line of dark. The edge of a wood that had been larger once and now kept its pride with a tangle of undergrowth and a refuse of broken branches. Tywin's wagons had gone through it and left scars. Robert smiled. "We will rest there," he said. And his captains did not argue because they had learned that when the king smiled like that it meant work was coming that would feel like something a man might tell his children about if he lived long enough. They went down into the dark. The wood took the noise out of their metal and kept it for itself. Men spoke softer for no reason. A bird scolded them and then decided it had better things to do and left them to their slow push. They came upon an old cart, off the road, half swallowed by vines and patience. A boy in Grafton colors touched its wheel and said, "My mother used one like this to fetch a pig to market." And the man beside him said, "Hush, not unkindly." At the heart of the wood, they found the other thing men always leave. A place where they have knelt to piss. The smell was unmistakable. Robert looked around and found the low hill that any man would have chosen for a watch post and the little bare patch where men's boots had made it plain. He climbed and looked out. Beyond the trees, the land spread glum and honest, a place where columns would look like columns and men would look small enough to be counted. He turned and spoke quietly to Ned, and Ned listened and did not blink. They set out at noon, when the light lies to the eye and makes men think lines are nearer or farther than they are. Robert didn't want the first charge to strike at a line. He wanted it to strike at a thought. He chose the place where Tywin's men would expect a gentle test. He sent singers to the other side and told them to sing badly. He sent a pig with a bell tied to its neck because sometimes men are lifted out of caution by laughter, and he wanted laughter to happen elsewhere. When he judged the time, he loosed the center like a beast that has been held and is grateful for the discipline that had kept it from running earlier. They hit not the edge but the seam. Men who have spent their lives making seams tidy can be enraged by a thing pulled crooked between their hands. For a half hour the lion showed a snarl. For another half hour it showed skill. Then it showed the thing Robert had hoped to see. A thought of retreat that had not yet been ordered. He did not try to make that thought into a rout. He tried to make it into a habit. He pressed just enough. He let Ned not press where pressing would make the line thirsty and careless. He let Bolton do something a little ugly and a little useful and decided to watch Roose carefully for the rest of his life. He let Brynden play the small harp he always carried hidden under his cloak and turn 3 notes into a turning. At dusk it was done in the way things are done that are not decided forever. Tywin pulled away with much of his army intact and most of his pride nicked. Robert stood under a dripping elm and thought about the way a man must husband men, the way his steward once husbanded wine. He sent no chase. He sent men with lanterns to find the wounded. He sent a boy to tell a woman to go and find her husband because a king has that luxury sometimes, to put joy in 2 poor bellies with a word. He slept that night in a tent with one wall pulled up so that the rain could be heard to come and go. He dreamed of a time when he and Ned had slept under other kinds of tents. Sky, snow, smoke, and of laughter that left the mouth clean. He woke twice to the sound of men dying as men die in the night, quietly, taking care not to wake others. The 3rd time, he rose and walked and found a young knight from the vale staring at nothing with bright, dry eyes. He asked his name. The boy told him. He asked the boy if he had eaten. The boy said he could not eat. Robert told him to put bread in his mouth and chew until it was soft enough to swallow, and the boy did it because the king said to, and later thanked him, and later forgot to thank him, which pleased Robert more. The next day brought little and much. A cart came in from the west with a flag of truce and a Lannister steward whose hair had receded with dignity, and who had learned to keep his shoulders level at the cost of forgetting how to shrug. He asked for the return of 2 wagons that had been taken the day before, and said that Lord Tywin would be gracious if those wagons were returned intact. Robert told him the wagons had been eaten by the road. The steward looked sad in a well-bred way and left. Another cart came with Thuras half asleep on the boards and Beric awake beside him with a look in his eyes that had not been there the week before. They had not found the mountain. They had found 3 of his men and a track that would put them on him in a day's hard riding if they wished to be cut to pieces. They had found a house burned with care and a field left alone with contempt. They had hanged a man who had made a game of his knife and another who had laughed at it. Thuras told it all as if cataloguing the materials for a prayer. "I will have him," Beric said, "even if it takes me until I have a beard down to my belly and not a tooth in my head. I will have him and bring him to a rope that does not break." "See that the rope does break," Robert said. "That way we can be done with him and you can be done with this and go home to tell someone who will learn to hate the word mountain because it keeps you from the table. Go. Take more men if you need them. Take fewer if more will be seen. Eat and go." They ate. They went. Robert watched them until they were small and then not there at all. He stood with his hands on his belt and looked at nothing for a time and then turned and went back into the weather of his war. Letters came. Olenna wrote that Marjorie had a new gown and a new mind, both of which chimed pleasantly with Renly's old charm. She wrote that grain moved like good news. Doran wrote with maddening patience that justice is a wine best drunk carefully, and added a line about how lemon trees can be coaxed indoors in winter if a man cares to see to it each day. Stannis wrote that he had ordered a tally of oars and that oars were loyalties one could hold in one's hand, which made them better than men. Robb wrote that he would need bread at Moat Cailin that winter and that he did not intend to remain at Moat Cailin. Walder wrote that he had grandchildren enough to fill a hall and that halls are empty without marriages. Robert sent back to Walder the kind of words that are so polite they cannot be refused. To Robb he sent truth, which Robb would value above courtesy and did. To Stannis, he sent an order not to drown anyone without first counting them and a crude drawing of a chain coiled like a dragon. To Doran, he sent a man with a quiet face and a long memory. A Dornishman who had gone north for love and had found honor instead and had decided both were alike in that they are hard to keep. To Olenna he sent an apology for his brother's self-importance and an invitation to send Marjorie's favorite sweetmeats to the front and promised to pay for them with Tywin's purses when he took them. He did not write to Cersei. He went once to her door in his mind and said the one thing he had not said, once gently, as one man might say to a woman he had loved at an inn and not in a palace. We could have been kinder to one another, and then closed the thought away as if it were a chest he had found empty. He did not try to open it again. In the next push, the stag went not at the lion's face but at its shadow. He sent men to speak to outlying keeps, to the poor places where a Lannister banner flew over a hall with bad thatch. He told the men inside they could keep their roofs if they let his men pass, and he would curse their names for a year and then forget them. He took carts full of nails and left carts full of meat. He put a note under a rock at a turning that said, "Go home. Your lord is in safer fields than these. He will not thank you for dying where he cannot write it down." He made the war not a blaze but a wet smolder that creeps and disgusts and goes everywhere under doorways and through gaps where wind sneaks. It was ugly. It was also effective. Tywin's letters began to grow shorter. Robert's laughs grew rarer and better. Ned's hair, streaked with winter, looked more like an otter's pelt when rain took it. The men slept better on nights when the wind blew one way and not the other. They spoke less of great deeds and more of the way the soup had been too salty yesterday and not salty enough today. And in that talk there is both rot and salvation. Catelyn came back from the twins with a look of someone who has allowed herself to be insulted for a useful end and will bathe later. The crossing had been granted for a price that could be paid with pride and promises rather than coin. Rosalind Fry would someday be a bride to someone not yet determined. Arya would be promised to a boy with bad teeth and good land. Robb would come and feast and pretend not to notice when Lord Walder licked his lower lip mid-sentence. It was a mess, but a neat one, like a room left in a hurry and then returned to and put to rights. She put the parchment down and put her hands on the table, and Ned set his on top of them, and Robert looked away because there are things that belong to men that are not for kings. "Robb is coming," she said. "Walder has taken his toll." Robb paid it and did not grimace, at least where anyone could see it. He asked after you both. "He will see us," Robert said. "He will learn more from watching men he has known all his life than he will from any men who have only just learned his name." Tywin turned toward the west at last, as men turn toward hearth and food. He had spent coin and men and patience. He had taken little. He had kept himself and his house's heart safe, which was a kind of victory not measured in songs. He would go to the rock and let men see that the rock remains, and from there he would send forth another sort of hand. He would write, and suddenly men who had not bled would remember debts. He would count again. Robert let him. He did not call it victory. He called it breath. He sent ravens not with boasts but with lists. Names of villages that would need grain in 3 weeks. Names of captains who would need to be promoted because the men already obeyed them. Names of dead. He asked for fewer songs and more boots. He waited. He walked one morning with Ned into a little orchard where only 2 trees had borne fruit, and those grudgingly. Small, red things hard as pebbles. He picked one and bit it. It was sour. He grinned. He tossed the rest of it to a goat who had wandered in from a nearby pasture and was eyeing their cloaks with interest. "When this is finished," he said, "I am going to build something. Not a castle. I have castles and they are full of air. A road, perhaps, that does not break under a cart." He looked at Ned. "Will you be there to scowl at me when I try to make it straight where the land wants a curve?" "I will be there to tell you the land always wants a curve," Ned said, and the ghost of a laugh moved at his eye. "And you?" Robert turned, the apple in his cheek, the hammer across his back. "Will be there to tell me that water will puddle if I do not crown it proper." "I will," Ned said. They stood together, two men who had once been boys and had learned, unwillingly, the shapes of their own souls. The day was ordinary. The war slouched on. A bird called and received no answer. The goat had decided to nibble on the king's cloak. Robert shooed it away with an oath that made Ned raise an eyebrow and try not to smile. A messenger came with wind in his hair that he had not had time to comb back and dirt on his boots that had not had time to fall off. He had a seal from King's Landing and a look that said he had not slept in a bed in a week and would not know what to do with sheets if offered them. He handed the parchment over and stood aside, eyes carefully on nothing. Robert broke it. Tyrion had written carefully, with the sort of handwriting one uses when one wishes a letter to survive being read by fools. He said that the chain was ready. He said that the alchemists had grown restless and he had grown tired of soothing them, and that Stannis had already done so above his station. He said that Duskendale had grown less fond of Lannister Red and more fond of Tyrell Green, and that this was a kind of danger and a kind of gift. He said that a certain lordling had mentioned the word wildfire in a tone that made Tyrion conclude he should either be killed or promoted, and as killing was untidy he had been promoted and was now being watched by two men who could neither read nor be bribed. He said that there was a rumor of dragons in the east that would one day cross the sea, and that such rumors were a luxury no one here could afford. He said that he missed good wine. Robert folded the letter and set it under the cup again, as if some part of him had become superstitious about that. He looked at Ned. "We go back," he said, surprising himself only a little with how quickly the decision came. "We have done what we can do here without burning old castles for the pleasure of making smoke. We have split Lord Tywin from his suppers and made him consider the price of salt. Now we go and sit our own chair and keep it."
Ned nodded.
He had been thinking it for 3 days and had been waiting for the king to think it himself, because that is what a hand does that no one writes down. He waits for the king to come to the thought he has already had and then does not tell him he had it first. They sent men in a fan, to Riverrun to say breathe, to the twins to say not yet another toll, to the smaller keeps to say the king would come by and would pay in coin and not only in words. They sent men to Storm's End to say Renly should come and stand beside his brother and be seen to do so. They sent no one to Dragonstone because Stannis had already written before he could be told to. They rode not as men who flee, not as men who pursue, but as men who return to a house they have left in the care of others and are not yet sure in their hearts whether those others have kept the floor clean. The road back to King's Landing is a silly thing when you count the stones and serious when you count the men it has seen. They passed a place where Arya, years from now, might have sat on a rock and thought a certain hard thought and chosen a certain hard path. They passed a tree that might once have held a rope and a man. They passed a woman with a child in her shawl who looked at them without interest because interest had been used up that day. They passed the fields where the poor put their hands into soil and hoped none of these men would spoil it. They came upon the city in the late afternoon when shadow makes the red of the keep darker and the stink of the fish markets less forgiving. The walls looked as they had when Robert had left them. Crenellations like teeth that need a better dentist, watchmen leaning and looking and being looked at, a flag that drooped and then lifted smugly when a gust came through. The gate swallowed the king and his host, one bite, then another, until what had been outside was inside and the world changed in that way that cities require of the men who look after them. Robert went to the yard where he had swung his hammer and laid it down. He stood still a moment and then started laughing. Men looked and then looked away because laughter from a king can be like thunder. Useful for telling you the weather, dangerous to stand under. He walked to the small council chamber and found Tyrion already there, feet barely touching the floor, and Stannis soon after, jaw tight enough to crack a nut between his molars, and little finger leaning as if his bones had been replaced with cord and Varys with a new ring on his pinky that had not been there yesterday. Pycelle came last and wheezed and lowered himself with the sigh of an old leather pouch being set down. Robert put both hands on the table and leaned, and the table accepted him. He looked at each in turn, and they felt it, as men do when someone who has been away returns with more of himself than he took with him. He said, "We did not win. We did not lose. We made the game a little different and made the other player move where he did not wish to. Now we finished the thing here." Stannis said, "The chain holds." Tyrion said, "The men hold if paid." Littlefinger said, "The coin holds if promised." Varys said, "The people hold if comforted." Pycelle said, "The gods," and then remembered something and cleared his throat and said, "The September holds if not crowded." Robert looked at Ned, and Ned said, "The law holds if not bent." "Good," Robert said, and lifted his cup and drank water and set it down with a dull thud. "Then we will hold. Cersei will remain where she is. Jaime will remain where he is. Dorne will receive satisfaction by rope and writ. The Reach will be thanked and not allowed to think itself kingly. The Watch will be paid and kept too busy to consider honesty a luxury. And as for Joffrey, he let the name hang, a little weight on a little thread. He will learn Latin and humility, in that order." The men made their little noises of assent or amusement or discontent and tucked them away so that they could pretend later they had been silent. Robert stood. He felt the city settle into him, its weight, its want. It had always been a want, more than a place. A yearning for bread, for spectacle, for an end to the smell at the river mouth, for a story to tell at night that does not make children wake. He took a breath. He went to see his children, who were not his, and told Em a joke about a boar and a priest and a kettle, and Tommen laughed until he hiccuped, and Myrcella smiled like a string being plucked, and Joffrey stared, as if laughter were a thing he had never been introduced to formally, and might not shake hands with if so introduced. In the yard below, Arya ran with her little blade held just so, and Sandor Clegane watched her and scowled and did not tell her to stop, and Sansa crossed the hall upstairs with a tray of figs and did not spill a single one even when a courtier jostled her and said sorry without looking. Barristan stood under a lintel where the sun had decided to pause, and for a moment, in the gold of it, he did look like the songs say all knights looked once. Varys closed his book. Littlefinger opened his, which had no words but numbers. Stannis wrote a list of names beginning with what he thought the law would need to be called upon to consider and ending with 2 names he would not say aloud. Tyrion looked out a window and then came back to the table and added a line to a plan that would keep men from dying later. Roose Bolton smiled with his mouth and went to a room where men did not know who they were until he told them. Catelyn, in a chamber with a poor view and a good chair, tipped her head back and closed her eyes and slept for 20 minutes and woke and smiled because she knew how rare and how useful that had been. And Tywin Lannister, at the Rock, poured a small amount of wine into a goblet and then poured it back into the amphora because the wine had not breathed long enough, and this offended him in some small, possibly superstitious way. He sat. He wrote. He counted. He waited for his son to be sent to him in chains. He waited for the moment to be offered that he would recognize when it came to restore to his house that which had been taken, honor, or the appearance of it, which to some men is better. He was very good at waiting. Night came to King's Landing the way it comes to cities, layer by layer, distraction by distraction, with obviousness and yet always taken by surprise by someone who had meant to do one more thing in daylight and had not. The chain, under the water, felt along itself with the blind curiosity of a snake dreaming. The river flowed. Far out, beyond where ordinary men's maps end and bolder men's begin. Rumors coiled upon themselves and slept or woke and went hunting. Robert slept and dreamed that he stood again in the Kingswood with the boar before him, and that when he raised the hammer the beast bowed, politely, and backed into the brush and let him pass without challenge, and that beyond the boar there was a road that had never broken under cart or storm, that ran straight where the land wanted curve and yet somehow did not flood for it, and that on the horizon was a tree with a rope hanging from it, and there was no one at the end of the rope, and he woke half laughing and half choking and sat with his feet upon the floor until his breath had gone from him and then returned. In the morning he went to the sept and lit a candle and was startled to find it stayed lit and did not gutter. He told the mother nothing. He told the father that he would try to do better. He told the stranger he could wait. He came out into the light. The hammer sat where he had left it. He took it up. It was heavy. He smiled. The day waited, ordinary and full of ways for men to be good or to show a passable imitation. He went to it like a man to work,